A woman stood shivering on a frozen train platform, clutching a suitcase and the last shred of her dignity, while the man who'd promised to marry her announced to the entire town that she wasn't good enough. The rejection was public, the humiliation was complete. But what happened next? When a stranger stepped forward and changed everything, would shake this frontier town to its core. This is a story about the woman nobody wanted who became the one man would sacrifice everything to keep. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The train's brakes screamed against frozen metal, announcing arrival the way everything announced itself in Cedar Bluff, loud, harsh, and without mercy. Elena Whitmore pressed her forehead against the frost-covered window, watching the platform materialize through steam and December cold. 23 days of travel had turned her carefully pressed blue dress into a wrinkled disaster. The orphanage matron's voice still echoed in her head. "You're 25, Elena. This is your last chance at a decent life. Last chance." The words had followed her across rivers and prairie, through 3 state lines and more hope than she'd allowed herself in years. The conductor appeared in the aisle, his weathered face neutral. "Cedar Bluff, miss. End of the line." Elena nodded, unable to speak past the knot in her throat. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the worn leather suitcase wedged beneath the seat. Everything she owned compressed into one bag that weighed less than her anxiety. The platform was crowded, more crowded than she'd expected for a town this size. Women in heavy coats clustered near the general store entrance, their breath forming small clouds as they whispered behind gloved hands. Men leaned against the saloon's weathered posts, watching with the lazy curiosity of people who had nothing better to do on a Thursday afternoon. They were all staring at the train. No, they were staring at her. Elena's heart hammered as she stepped down onto the platform, her thin boots meeting wood worn smooth by 1,000 previous arrivals and departures. The cold hit her like a physical thing, cutting through her inadequate coat and stealing the air from her lungs. She scanned the crowd, looking for the face from the photograph. Harold Boone, age 37, owner of the Double B Ranch, widowed for 2 years. The agency had described him as practical and established. The photograph showed a stern man with a heavy jaw and eyes that didn't quite smile even when his mouth attempted it. "He's probably just nervous," Elena had told herself during the long journey west. Meeting a stranger is difficult for everyone. But Harold Boone wasn't nervous. He was standing near the ticket office, surrounded by what appeared to be half the town's male population. When he saw Elena, something flickered across his face. Not recognition, not welcome, but something closer to irritation mixed with resignation. He didn't move toward her. Elena felt her stomach drop, but she forced her feet forward anyway. The crowd parted slightly, creating a narrow path that felt more like a gauntlet than a greeting. Her suitcase bumped against her leg with each step, the handle slick with nervous sweat despite the freezing temperature. "Mr. Boone?" Her voice came out smaller than she'd intended. Harold looked at her for a long moment. Up close, he was exactly like his photograph, heavy-jawed, hard-eyed, with the kind of mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile years ago. But the photograph hadn't captured the mean set of his shoulders, or the way he looked at her like she was a horse that had gone lame between the auction and delivery. "You're smaller than I expected." His first words. Not a greeting, not a welcome, just disappointment wrapped in observation. Elena felt heat rise to her cheeks despite the cold. "The agency sent my measurements. I didn't misrepresent." "Doesn't matter now." Harold cut her off, his voice loud enough that the crowd shifted closer, sensing something worth watching. "Won't be needing you after all." The platform went absolutely silent. Elena's ears rang. I don't understand." Harold pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket. The agency contract, creased from being read and reread. He held it up like evidence in a trial. "Says here I got 30 days to decide if the arrangement is suitable. Well, I've decided you're not suitable. You haven't even spoken to me for 5 minutes. Don't need 5 minutes to see you're not ranch wife material?" Harold's voice carried across the platform, and Elena realized with growing horror that he wanted everyone to hear this. Too thin, too frail-looking, probably can't handle a full day's work, let alone help run a spread the size of mine. A woman near the general store made a small sound of sympathy. One of the men by the saloon actually laughed, a quick bark of amusement that he tried to cover with a cough. Elena's hands tightened around her suitcase handle, until her knuckles went white. I traveled 23 days to get here. I gave up my position at the orphanage. That's your problem, not mine. Harold folded the contract and tucked it back into his pocket with the casual dismissal of someone throwing away a disappointing purchase. Agency says I owe you return fare. I'll pay it. But I won't be marrying you, and I won't be taking you to my ranch. The world tilted slightly. Elena heard the words, understood them individually, but together they formed something too enormous to process. She had no position to return to. No family waiting. The orphanage had made it clear her room would be given to someone younger, more useful. She had exactly $7.30 in her reticule. Not enough for return fare. Not enough for anything except maybe a week's room and board if she could find a boarding house that would take a woman alone. Please. The word escaped before she could stop it, and she hated how it sounded, desperate and small, and exactly like every other orphan begging for scraps. I can learn. I'm strong. I can work hard. Decisions made. Harold turned away, addressing the crowd instead of her. Anyone know if the next eastbound train runs tomorrow or Saturday? A man near the ticket office started to answer, but his voice faded into the background as Elena's vision narrowed to a single point. The platform seemed to stretch and compress at the same time. Faces blurred together, curious, pitying, entertained. She was a spectacle, a public rejection playing out for an audience that would talk about this for weeks. The orphanage matron had been wrong. This wasn't her last chance at a decent life. This was her last chance at any life. And it was disintegrating in front of strangers who would forget her name by supper time. Elena forced herself to breathe, in through her nose, out through her mouth, the way she'd learned to do when the older girls at the orphanage had been particularly cruel. Don't cry. Don't give them the satisfaction. Don't let them see you break. But her hands were shaking so hard the suitcase slipped from her grip and landed on the platform with a hollow thud. Harold glanced back at the sound, and for just a moment, something that might have been guilt flickered across his face. But it disappeared as quickly as it came, replaced by stubborn certainty. You'll be fine, he said, his tone suggesting he was trying to convince himself as much as her. Young woman like you, you'll find something. Then he walked away, just like that. Turned his back and walked toward a heavy wagon hitched near the general store, his boots loud on the platform, each step hammering another nail into Elena's future. The crowd began to disperse, the show apparently over. A few women threw sympathetic glances over their shoulders, but sympathy didn't pay for food or shelter. The men returned to their posts by the saloon, already moving on to the next source of entertainment. Elena stood alone on the platform as the train began its preparations to depart. The conductor who'd announced her stop was helping the engineer with something near the front car, carefully avoiding eye contact. Even the station master had disappeared into his office, probably uncomfortable with the scene he'd just witnessed. The December wind picked up, cutting through Elena's inadequate coat and making her eyes water. Or maybe that was tears. She couldn't tell anymore, and it didn't matter. Cold was cold, whether it came from weather or circumstance. She bent to retrieve her suitcase, and that's when she saw him. A man crossing the street from the direction of what looked like a carpentry shop. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a heavy work coat dusted with sawdust and wood shavings. He moved with purpose, but not hurry, his boots crunching through the thin layer of ice that had formed on the frozen mud. He was looking directly at her. Elena straightened slowly, instinctively wary. She'd learned early at the orphanage that men who approached women alone rarely had good intentions. But this man's face wasn't wearing the expression she'd learned to fear. He didn't look predatory or opportunistic. He looked steady, like a tree that had weathered too many storms to be surprised by another one. The man stopped about 6 feet away, maintaining a respectful distance. Up close, Elena could see he was somewhere in his 30s, with dark hair starting to gray at the temples and lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting into sun and wind. His face was weathered but not unkind, the kind of face that belonged to someone who worked with his hands and didn't waste time on unnecessary words. "Miss." His voice was quiet, rough from disuse or cold, or both. "I'm Rowan Mercer." Elena waited, her entire body tensed for whatever was coming next. A proposition, probably. Men in frontier towns always assumed desperate women would be grateful for any offer, no matter how degrading. But Rowan Mercer didn't make a proposition. "I've got a cabin about a mile outside town," he said. 3 bedrooms, 2 of them occupied by my children. The third one's been empty since my wife died 2 years back." He paused, and Elena saw his throat work as he swallowed. "You need a place to stay. I'm offering it. No strings, just a room until you figure out what's next." Elena stared at him, unable to process the words into anything that made sense. "I don't... Why would you..." "Because what just happened to you was wrong." Rowan's voice stayed level, but something hard entered his eyes. "And because this town just stood here and watched it happen without one person stepping up to say so." He glanced around the platform, at the women still whispering by the general store, at the men pretending not to listen from the saloon. "I won't watch someone be humiliated without offering help. That's not who I am." "You don't know me. I could be..." "You could be a lot of things," Rowan agreed. "But right now you're a woman who got dealt a bad hand through no fault of her own, and you need help. I'm offering it." He shifted his weight, suddenly looking uncomfortable, as if he'd already said more words in the last minute than he usually spoke in a day. "Look, I'm not good at this. Talking, I mean. But the offer's real. Room, board, no expectations except maybe you could help with some cooking and mending if you're willing. My daughter's been wearing dresses with holes in them because I can't sew worth a damn, and my son thinks beans and hardtack is a proper meal." Despite everything, the humiliation, the fear, the complete collapse of every plan she'd made, Elena felt a small, hysterical laugh bubble up in her chest. "You're offering me shelter in exchange for domestic help?" "I'm offering you shelter because it's the right thing to do," Rowan corrected. "The help would just be appreciated if you're inclined. If you're not, the room's still yours." It was the stupidest thing Elena had ever heard. Taking charity from a strange man in a town where she knew no one, moving into his home, trusting that his intentions were as honorable as his words suggested. Every instinct honed by 15 years in an orphanage screamed at her to refuse, to find another way, to not put herself in a position of owing anyone anything. But she had $7.30, no return ticket, no job, no prospects. And winter in Cedar Bluff wasn't forgiving to women sleeping in train stations. "How do I know you're not..." Elena couldn't finish the sentence, but Rowan seemed to understand. "You don't," he said simply. "Can't offer you proof I'm decent except my word, and I know words are cheap." He glanced toward the general store. "Mrs. Patterson over there by the fabric shop, she can vouch for me if you want to ask. Or Tom Chen at the Mercantile. Or pretty much anyone who's lived here more than a month. I've got a reputation in this town, and it's not for taking advantage of women." Elena looked at the people Rowan had mentioned. Mrs. Patterson was watching them with open curiosity, but when Elena met her eyes, the older woman gave a small nod. Not enthusiastic, but not warning either. More like confirmation. "Your children," Elena said slowly. "How old?" "Eli's 10. Rose is 6. For the first time, something other than steadiness crossed Rowan's face, a flicker of pain, old but not healed. "Their mother died of fever 2 winters ago. We've been managing, but..." He trailed off, then seemed to gather himself. "They're good kids. Eli's protective of his sister, might be wary of a stranger at first. Rose is shy, but she'll warm up." The train whistle blew, sharp and final. The conductor was making his rounds, calling out the departure warning. In 5 minutes, the train would leave, and Elena's last connection to everywhere she'd come from would disappear down the tracks. She looked at Rowan Mercer, the stranger offering impossible kindness for no reason she could understand, and made a decision that would change everything. "All right," she said quietly. "Thank you." Rowan nodded once, no smile, no celebration of his victory, just acceptance. "Wagon's over by the carpentry shop. I'll help with your bag." He reached for the suitcase, but Elena held on for a moment longer. "Mr. Mercer, I need you to understand something. I won't be a burden, and I won't..." She struggled for the right words. "I won't be anything except grateful and helpful. That's all I can offer right now." "That's more than enough," Rowan said. He took the suitcase, and Elena noticed his hands. Scarred, calloused, the hands of someone who built things. "Come on, it's too cold to stand out here arguing about it." As they walked across the platform toward his wagon, Elena felt every eye in Cedar Bluff follow them. The whispers started before they'd gone 10 feet. She could feel them like insects crawling across her skin. By sunset, Everyone in town would know that the rejected mail-order bride had gone home with Rowan Mercer, the widowed carpenter with 2 children. They would speculate. They would gossip. They would create stories far more scandalous than the simple truth. Elena lifted her chin and kept walking. She'd survived 15 years in an orphanage where cruelty was casual and kindness was currency. She'd survived the long journey west on nothing but hope and stubbornness. She'd survived public humiliation on a train platform in front of strangers. She could survive whispers. Rowan's wagon was old but well-maintained, the wood showing signs of careful repair. 2 horses stood patiently in their harnesses, their breath making small clouds in the cold air. Rowan lifted Elena's suitcase into the back with easy strength, then offered his hand to help her up onto the bench. His palm was warm despite the temperature, rough with calluses, but steady. "Town's gonna talk," Rowan said as he climbed up beside her and took the reins. It wasn't a question. "I know. Doesn't bother you?" Elena thought about that. "It bothers me, but not enough to freeze to death to avoid it." The corner of Rowan's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "Fair enough." He clicked his tongue, and the horses started forward, pulling the wagon away from the platform, away from the staring crowds, away from the spot where Elena's carefully constructed future had fallen apart. They rode in silence through Cedar Bluff's main street. The town was small, one main road with buildings clustered on either side like children huddling for warmth. General store, saloon, church, boarding house, carpentry shop, blacksmith. Everything a frontier town needed and nothing it didn't. People stopped to watch them pass. A woman sweeping the steps of the boarding house paused mid-sweep. 2 men loading supplies onto a freight wagon stopped talking to stare. Even the blacksmith came to the door of his shop, wiping his hands on his apron, his face curious. Elena kept her eyes forward, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her discomfort. "They'll get bored eventually," Rowan said quietly. "Town this small, they need something to talk about. But there'll be new gossip by spring, and you'll be old news." "You sound like you speak from experience." Rowan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "When my wife died, people talked about how I'd manage alone with 2 kids, about whether I'd remarry quick or move back east where my family could help, about every decision I made regarding my children." He guided the horses around a frozen rut in the road. They meant well, most of them, but meaning well doesn't make it less exhausting. Elena understood that. Good intentions wrapped in judgment still felt like judgment. They left the main street behind, following a narrow road that wound between stands of pine trees heavy with snow. The sounds of town faded. The voices, the hammering from the blacksmith shop, the distant piano from the saloon. Within minutes, there was nothing but the creak of wagon wheels, the rhythmic thud of horse hooves, and the whisper of wind through frozen branches. The isolation should have been frightening. Elena was heading into the wilderness with a man she'd known for less than 15 minutes, toward a home she'd never seen, to live with children who didn't know she existed. But somehow, the quiet felt like relief. "The cabin's not fancy," Rowan said after a while, breaking the silence, "but it's warm. Built it myself 6 years ago when we first came west. 3 bedrooms, like I said, main room with the kitchen, root cellar, decent well. Needs work, always needs work, but it's solid." "Sounds better than the orphanage dormitory," Elena said before she could stop herself. Rowan glanced at her. "That where you came from?" "Orphanage? Since I was 10. My parents died of cholera. No family willing to take me in, so—" Elena shrugged, trying to make it sound casual instead of like the defining tragedy of her life. "Could have been worse. Some orphanages are terrible. Mine was just institutional." "And the mail-order bride agency? Seemed like a way out. The matron said I was getting too old to be useful, and they needed the bed for younger children." Elena pulled her coat tighter against the cold. "So I signed up with the agency, Harold Boone's request came through, and I thought—" She laughed without humor. "I don't know what I thought. That desperation looked like hope, maybe." "Boone's a jackass," Rowan said flatly. "Always has been. Makes money, but doesn't know how to be decent about it. His first wife left him, didn't die like he tells people. She ran off with a traveling merchant about 5 years back, and Harold's been bitter ever since. He said he was widowed. He lies about a lot of things." Rowan's voice carried disgust. "What he did to you today, that public rejection." That was deliberate. He wanted to hurt you because he's hurt, and miserable people love spreading their misery around. Elena absorbed that information, adding it to the growing pile of revelations about her almost husband. I'm better off then. Damn right you are. They fell back into silence, but it was different now, less awkward, more companionable. Elena watched the landscape roll past, studying this place that had somehow become her present, if not her future. The pine trees grew thicker as they traveled, creating walls of green-black against the white snow. In the distance, mountains rose like sleeping giants, their peaks lost in low clouds. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. Like the difference between a painting of wilderness and actual wilderness. One was pretty, the other was real. Here, Rowan said suddenly, guiding the horses onto an even narrower path that branched off the main road. Just around this bend. The cabin appeared between the trees like something from a story. Single story, built from dark wood that had weathered to a deep gray, with a stone chimney releasing a thin stream of smoke into the cold air. The roof looked solid, the windows intact. The porch, though slightly sagging on one side, still functional. It wasn't large, but it didn't look mean or desperate either. It looked like someone had built it with care and then slowly stopped having energy for maintenance. As the wagon approached, the front door burst open and a small figure came flying out, a little girl in a dress that was indeed too short and showing clear evidence of being mended inexpertly. She had wild, dark curls escaping from uneven braids, and her father's steady eyes in a face still round with childhood. "Papa!" She stopped at the edge of the porch, bouncing on her toes, then froze when she saw Elena. "Oh!" Rowan pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down. "Rose, come here." The little girl approached cautiously, studying Elena with the unnerving intensity that only small children could manage. "Who's that?" "This is Miss Elena Whitmore," so Rowan said. "She's going to be staying with us for a while. Elena, this is my daughter Rose." Elena climbed down from the wagon carefully, her legs stiff from cold and travel. She crouched down to put herself at Rose's eye level, remembering how much she'd hated when adults towered over her at the orphanage. "Hello, Rose. It's nice to meet you." Rose tilted her head, still evaluating. "You're pretty." "Thank you. But your dress is wrinkled." "Rose," Rowan said warningly, but Elena laughed. A real laugh this time, not the hollow sound from earlier. "You're absolutely right," Elena agreed. "I've been on a train for 3 weeks, and I'm afraid my dress paid the price. I probably look like I was packed in a trunk and shipped as freight." Rose giggled, a sound like bells, and some of her wariness evaporated. "Papa says we shouldn't comment on people's appearances. He says it's rude." "Your papa is right, but sometimes honesty is worth a little rudeness." Elena straightened, becoming aware of another presence watching from the doorway. A boy stood half hidden in shadow, taller than his sister but not yet grown, with the gangly proportions of someone caught between childhood and something else. His face was harder than Rose's, more guarded, and he watched Elena with open suspicion. "Eli," Rowan called. "Come help with the bag." The boy emerged slowly, each step deliberate and measured. He looked at Elena the way someone might look at a stray dog that had followed them home, wary about diseases and bite risks, uncertain about whether feeding it would mean keeping it. "This is my son Eli," Rowan said. "Eli, Miss Whitmore will be using the spare room." "Why?" Eli's voice was flat, challenging. "Because she needs a place to stay, and we have room." "We don't know her. We didn't know Mrs. Chen when we first met her either," Rowan said patiently. "That's generally how knowing people works. You meet them, then you know them." Eli's jaw set in a way that reminded Elena painfully of his father. Mama used to say not to trust strangers. The air went sharp with tension. Rose's smile disappeared. Rowan's face hardened into something unreadable. "Your mama was right," he said quietly. "But she also taught you to help people who needed help. Miss Whitmore needs help, so we're helping." Eli looked like he wanted to argue, but something in his father's expression made him swallow whatever words he'd been preparing. Instead, he moved past Elena to grab her suitcase from the wagon, his movements stiff with barely contained resentment. "Eli," Rowan started. "I'll put it in the spare room," Eli interrupted, and disappeared into the cabin without another word. Rowan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I apologize for that." Don't, Elena said. He's protecting his family. That's not something to apologize for. He's being rude. He's being a child who lost his mother and doesn't want to lose anything else. Elena understood that bone deep. She'd been that child once, after her parents died. Grief made people build walls, and you couldn't blame them for defending those walls against perceived threats. Rowan looked at her for a long moment, and Elena saw something shift behind his eyes. Reassessment, maybe, or surprise that she understood. "Come inside," he said finally. "You must be freezing." The cabin's interior was exactly what Elena expected from a home where a widower raised 2 children, functional but chaotic. Clean enough to show someone cared, messy enough to show that care was spread thin. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, fire crackling cheerfully. Wooden furniture that looked handmade, a table, chairs, a bench, occupied the main room. The kitchen area held a cast-iron stove, shelves lined with mismatched dishes, and a work surface scarred from years of use. Children's things littered the space. Rose's carved wooden animals clustered on a windowsill. Eli's schoolbooks stacked haphazardly near the fireplace. A half-finished sewing project abandoned on the table, the stitching so crooked it was almost architectural. It wasn't pretty, but it was lived in. Real. The kind of place that had absorbed laughter and tears and ordinary moments until they'd seeped into the walls. "Spare rooms through there," Rowan said, pointing to a door off the main room. "It's small, but there's a bed and a chest of drawers. Window faces east, so you'll get morning light. Privy's out back, 30 feet from the house. We share washing water. I haul it from the well every morning, try to keep a full bucket by the kitchen for drinking." Elena nodded, absorbing the practical information while trying not to think about how strange this was. This morning, she'd woken up on a train, believing she was hours away from becoming a rancher's wife. Now she was standing in a widower's cabin, learning where the privy was, preparing to share a home with 2 children who didn't want her there, and a man who'd offered charity for reasons she still didn't fully understand. "Miss Whitmore?" Rose had appeared at Elena's elbow, so quietly she hadn't heard her approach. "Are you hungry?" Was she? Elena tried to remember the last time she'd eaten, probably breakfast on the train, which felt like a lifetime ago. "A little." "I can make you something." Rose's face lit up with enthusiasm that immediately made Elena suspicious about what kind of cooking a 6-year-old could manage. But Rowan smiled, the first real smile Elena had seen from him. Small, but genuine. "Rose is actually pretty good with sandwiches. Can you make one for Miss Whitmore while I put the horses away?" "Yes!" Rose grabbed Elena's hand with complete confidence, tugging her toward the kitchen. "I make the best sandwiches. Eli says they're too thick, but that's because he's wrong about everything." Elena let herself be led, glancing back at Rowan, who gave her an apologetic shrug before heading back outside. The door closed behind him with a soft thud, leaving Elena alone with Rose's chatter and the crackle of the fire, and the awareness that somewhere in this cabin, Eli was probably plotting ways to make her leave. She'd dealt with worse. At the orphanage, the older girls had made her first year a nightmare of small cruelties and casual violence. She'd learned to endure, to find cracks in their armor, to survive until they got bored or moved on to easier targets. A grieving 10-year-old boy who resented her presence? Elena could handle that. "Do you like butter?" Rose was already pulling items from the shelves with practiced efficiency. "Papa says too much butter is wasteful, but Mama used to say life was too short for dry bread." Elena's chest tightened at the casual mention of the dead woman whose space she was occupying. "Your Mama sounds like she was smart." She was the smartest. Rose assembled bread, butter, and what looked like leftover ham with surprising skill. She knew everything, how to sew and garden and make medicine from plants. She could look at the sky and tell if it would rain. She sang songs that made you feel better when you were sad. "She sounds wonderful." Rose paused, her small hand still on the bread. "Eli doesn't like when people talk about her. He says it hurts too much." "What about you?" "It hurts," Rose admitted quietly. "But I don't want to forget her. If we stop talking about her, maybe I'll forget her voice or her face or important things." She looked up at Elena with eyes too old for 6 years. "Is that silly?" "No." Elena's throat felt tight. "That's not silly at all. Talking about people we love who are gone, that keeps them real. Your Mama was important. She should be talked about." Rose smiled, relieved, and went back to building her sandwich masterpiece. There, that's perfect. The sandwich was indeed thick, probably 3 times as much filling as most people would consider reasonable. But when Elena took a bite, it tasted like the first thing she'd eaten in weeks that wasn't traveling rations or desperation. "This is delicious," she said honestly. Rose beamed. "See? Not too thick. Eli doesn't know anything. I know plenty." Eli's voice came from the doorway. He'd apparently been listening. He stepped into the kitchen, his expression still wary but less hostile than before. "I know that we don't know anything about her, where she came from, why that man didn't want her, if she's running from something." "Eli," Rose protested, but Elena held up a hand. "Those are fair questions." She set down the sandwich and looked at Eli directly, refusing to flinch from his suspicion. "I came from an orphanage in Pennsylvania. The man who didn't want me, Harold Boone, decided I wasn't suitable before even speaking to me, and I'm not running from anything except poverty and limited options, which aren't crimes as far as I know." Eli's eyes narrowed. "Then why would Papa bring you here? He doesn't just help random strangers." "I don't know," Elena said honestly. "You'd have to ask him." "I did. He said it was the right thing to do." Eli's voice dripped skepticism. "That's not a real answer." "Maybe it's the only answer he has." Elena took another bite of sandwich, forcing herself to appear calm, even though her heart was pounding. This boy could make her life miserable if he decided to. One word to his father about discomfort or impropriety, and Elena would be back in town with nowhere to go. But lying to him would be worse. Children had excellent instincts for dishonesty. "Look," Elena said carefully, "I understand why you don't trust me. If I were you, I wouldn't trust me either. A stranger showing up, taking space in your home, eating your food, it's reasonable to be suspicious. All I can tell you is that I don't plan to hurt your family. I'll help where I can, stay out of your way where I can't, and leave as soon as I have enough money to start somewhere else." Eli studied her for a long moment. "How long will that take?" "I don't know. Depends on whether I can find work in town." "Doing what?" "Whatever someone will pay me for." Elena shrugged. "Sewing, cooking, cleaning, teaching? I'm not proud. I'll do what needs doing." Something flickered across Eli's face. Not acceptance exactly, but maybe the beginning of respect. Mama used to say that, "Do what needs doing." That was her. She said that a lot. The door opened, bringing a gust of cold air and Rowan stamping snow from his boots. He looked between Elena and Eli, clearly trying to gauge what had happened in his absence. "Everyone all right in here?" "Fine," Eli said shortly. He grabbed a piece of wood from the pile near the fireplace and headed to one of the other rooms, disappearing before his father could question him further. Rowan sighed. "He's not usually that difficult." "He's grieving," Elena said. "Grief makes everyone difficult." "Still, you're a guest." "I'm a stranger taking his dead mother's space." Elena kept her voice gentle but firm. "He has every right to be suspicious and resentful. It's actually a good sign. Means he's protective of what he has left." Rowan looked at her with that same reassessing expression from earlier. "You have siblings? You sound like you know children." "No siblings. But I grew up in an orphanage with 60 other children. You learn fast how to read people when your survival depends on it." Elena finished her sandwich and stood, brushing crumbs from her ruined dress. "Mr. Mercer, Rowan, if you're living here, might as well use my name." "Rowan," Elena corrected. "I need you to understand something. I'm grateful, truly grateful, for what you're doing. But I won't be charity. Point me toward whatever needs doing and I'll do it. I can earn my keep." Rowan was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "All right, if you're serious, the mending pile is about 3 feet high, and I can't sew worth a damn. Rose's dresses are all too short, Eli's shirts are missing buttons, and if you can cook something besides beans and hardtack, we'd all be grateful. But that can wait until tomorrow. Tonight, just—" He trailed off, seeming to search for words. "Just settle in." Elena wanted to argue, to insist on starting immediately, to prove she wasn't useless. But exhaustion crashed over her suddenly. 23 days of travel, public humiliation, fear, and now the strange limbo of charity from a stranger. "Thank you," she said quietly. Rowan nodded toward the spare room. Your bag's in there. I'll make sure the kids don't bother you. If you need anything, just holler. He left her standing in the kitchen, and Elena made her way to the room that would be hers for however long this arrangement lasted. It was small, as promised, barely larger than the closet she'd shared with two other girls at the orphanage. But it had a real bed with a worn quilt, a chest of drawers with only one drawer that stuck, and a window that actually opened. More importantly, it had a door that closed. Privacy. Real, actual privacy for the first time in 15 years. Elena sat on the bed, which creaked but held, and finally let herself feel the full weight of everything that had happened. The hope she'd carried across the country, the humiliation on the platform, the kindness of a stranger who had no reason to help her except that it was the right thing to do. She should cry. This seemed like a moment that deserved tears. But Elena had learned at the orphanage that tears were expensive. They cost energy she might need later, revealed vulnerability that could be exploited, and ultimately changed nothing. So instead of crying, she lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling, cataloging everything she needed to do. Find work, save money, figure out where to go next, survive. Outside the window, the December sun was already sinking toward the mountains, turning the snow pink and gold. In the main room, she could hear Rose's high voice chattering about something, Eli's lower voice responding with what sounded like annoyed patience, and Rowan's occasional rumble of laughter. A family. Not hers, but real nonetheless. Elena closed her eyes and let the sounds wash over her, knowing this was temporary, knowing she couldn't let herself get comfortable, knowing that attachment was a luxury she couldn't afford. But just for tonight, she could rest. Tomorrow would come with its own problems. Tonight, she had a bed, a roof, and something that almost felt like safety. For a woman who'd arrived in Cedar Bluff expecting to be a bride and ended up a charity case, that would have to be enough. Elena woke to darkness so complete she couldn't see her own hand in front of her face. For a disorienting moment, she didn't know where she was. The bed was wrong. The sounds were wrong. Even the smell was wrong. Not the institutional scent of lye soap and too many bodies in too small a space, but wood smoke and pine, and something else she couldn't identify. Then memory crashed back. Cedar Bluff. The platform. Harold Boone's public rejection. Rowan Mercer's impossible kindness. She sat up slowly, her body aching from travel and tension. Through the thin walls, she could hear the cabin settling around her, wood contracting in the cold, the fire crackling low, and what sounded like someone moving around in the main room. The window showed the barest hint of gray on the horizon. Dawn, or close to it. Elena dressed quickly in the same wrinkled blue dress, her only dress until she could wash and mend the spare in her suitcase, and braided her hair by touch alone. Her reflection in the small mirror above the dresser was barely visible, but she could make out enough to know she looked exactly like what she was. A woman who'd slept in her clothes and woken up in a stranger's house with no clear plan beyond surviving the next 24 hours. Good enough. She eased the door open, expecting to find the main room empty, but Rowan was already up. He stood at the stove, coaxing the fire to life, still wearing what looked like yesterday's clothes. When he heard the door, he glanced back, and Elena saw surprise flicker across his face. "You're up early," he said quietly, probably trying not to wake the children. Habit. At the orphanage, we had chores starting at 5. Elena moved into the kitchen, suddenly uncertain about the protocol here. Was she expected to take over? Wait for instructions? "Can I help?" Rowan straightened, wiping his hands on his pants. "You don't have to." "I want to earn my keep. You said so yourself. There's mending to do, cooking to manage. Might as well start." Elena looked around the kitchen, cataloging what she saw. "What do you normally make for breakfast?" "Porridge. Sometimes eggs if the chickens are cooperating." Rowan gestured toward a small hutch visible through the window. 3 hens out there, but they're temperamental about laying in winter. I'll check them after breakfast." Elena found the oats without asking. They were in the most logical place, a tin on the shelf near the stove. "Do the children like their porridge plain or with something in it?" "Rose likes molasses if we have it. Eli pretends he doesn't care, but he'll eat twice as much if there's butter mixed in." Rowan watched her move around the kitchen with an expression Elena couldn't quite read. "You really don't have to do this." "I really do." Elena measured oats into the pot with practiced efficiency. I'm not good at sitting idle, and I'm worse at accepting charity without giving something back. So unless you want me to spend the day feeling useless and guilty, let me help." Rowan was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but for what it's worth, you're not charity. You're—" He trailed off, seeming to search for the right word. "You're someone who got dealt a bad situation and deserves a chance to find their footing. That's different." Elena didn't argue, even though it felt like semantics. Charity, kindness, pity, the label didn't matter as much as the debt it created. But Rowan seemed to need to believe he wasn't just being charitable, so she let him have it. They worked in companionable silence as dawn gradually lightened the windows. Elena cooked while Rowan brought in wood for the fire, hauled fresh water from the well, and did a dozen other small tasks that apparently made up his morning routine. He moved with efficient economy, no wasted motion, the kind of rhythm that came from doing the same things in the same order every day for years. The porridge was nearly done when small footsteps sounded from one of the bedrooms. Rose appeared moments later, her wild curls even wilder from sleep, still wearing her nightgown and rubbing her eyes. "Papa?" She stopped short when she saw Elena at the stove. "Oh, you're still here. Did you think I'd leave in the middle of the night?" Elena asked gently. Rose shrugged, suddenly shy. "Sometimes people leave." The simple statement hit harder than it should have. Of course Rose would think that. Her mother had left, not by choice, but Dad was still gone, and in a child's understanding, gone was gone regardless of the reason. "I'm still here," Elena said firmly, "and I made breakfast. Do you want to help me set the table?" Rose's face brightened immediately. "I'm very good at setting tables. Mama taught me." She proved it too, moving around the kitchen with surprising competence for a 6-year-old. Plates in the right places, forks on the left, cups filled with water from the bucket. She hummed while she worked, a tune Elena didn't recognize but that sounded old, probably something her mother had sung. Eli emerged just as Elena was ladling porridge into bowls. Unlike his sister, he didn't look surprised to see Elena. He looked resigned, like he'd hoped she might be gone but hadn't really expected it. "Morning," Rowan said to his son. Eli grunted something that might have been a greeting and slumped into his chair. He stared at his porridge with deep suspicion, as if expecting it to be poisoned. "It's just oats," Elena said mildly, sitting down with her own bowl. "Same as your father would make. Smells different." "That's because Miss Elena added cinnamon," Rose announced proudly, as if she'd discovered a great secret. "I watched her do it." Eli took a reluctant bite, chewed slowly, then took another bite slightly faster. Elena hid her smile and focused on her own breakfast, letting the children's chatter fill the silence. Rose talked about her carved animals. Apparently each one had a name and complex backstory. Eli mostly grunted responses, but occasionally he'd correct some detail of Rose's story, which suggested he'd been paying more attention than he pretended. Rowan ate steadily, interjecting occasional comments, but mostly just listening to his children. Elena noticed how he watched them, not hovering exactly, but aware. Like he was constantly checking to make sure they were all right, that they were still whole, that grief hadn't broken something essential. It made her chest ache in a way she didn't want to examine. After breakfast, the morning routine unfolded with the kind of organized chaos that came from repetition. Eli had schoolwork to finish. Apparently there was a small schoolhouse in town, but winter weather meant lessons at home when travel was difficult. Rose had chores appropriate for a 6-year-old, which mostly involved putting her toys away and helping in ways that probably made tasks take twice as long. Elena cleared the breakfast dishes and found herself standing at the wash basin, staring at the pile of plates and realizing she'd slipped into domestic routine without even thinking about it. This wasn't her house. These weren't her children. This was temporary. But temporary or not, the dishes still needed washing. She was elbow-deep in soapy water when Rose appeared at her side, dragging a small wooden stool. "I can help dry." "You don't have to." "I want to." Rose climbed onto the stool and grabbed a cloth with determination. "Mama and I used to wash dishes together every morning. She'd wash and I'd dry, and we'd sing songs." Elena's hands stilled in the water. This was dangerous territory. She was standing in a dead woman's kitchen, doing a dead woman's chores, with the dead woman's daughter offering to recreate their shared ritual. "What songs did you sing?" Elena asked carefully. Rose's face scrunched in concentration. "There was one about a rabbit, and one about stars, and a silly one about a man who couldn't dance. I don't know those songs. I could teach you. Rose looked up at her with such open hopefulness that Elena felt something crack in her chest. If you want. I'd like that, Elena heard herself say. So Rose sang in her clear, high voice while they washed and dried dishes together. And if the songs were sometimes off-key and the words occasionally wrong, Elena didn't correct her. She just listened and learned, adding these small pieces of someone else's life to her own memory, knowing it was probably a mistake but unable to stop herself. They were nearly finished when Eli appeared in the doorway, his expression troubled. Papa says I have to go to town for supplies. He's asking if you need anything. The question was clearly directed at Elena, even though Eli wouldn't quite meet her eyes. I don't think so, Elena said. I have everything I brought with me. Which isn't much. Eli's bluntness was back. Your suitcase is tiny. You can't have more than 2 or 3 dresses in there. 2, Elena corrected, and they both need washing and mending before they're fit to wear in public again. Eli absorbed this with a slight frown. So you need fabric and thread. Probably needles too if you're going to fix all the mending Papa mentioned. I can make do. Making do is stupid when the general store is right there. Eli spoke with the absolute certainty of someone who'd never had to carefully ration resources. Papa's got an account. Mrs. Patterson won't care if we add fabric to it. Your father's already done enough. He's not doing it. I am. Eli straightened his shoulders, and for a moment he looked much older than 10. You're staying in our house, eating our food, doing our chores. The least we can do is make sure you have clothes that don't look like you slept in a barn. It was possibly the worst delivered act of kindness Elena had ever received, but she recognized it for what it was. Eli's way of accepting her presence without actually admitting he was accepting it. Thank you, Elena said quietly. That's very thoughtful. Eli turned red and mumbled something that sounded like whatever before retreating quickly. Rose giggled behind her drying cloth. He likes you, she whispered conspiratorially. He absolutely does not. He does. He's just bad at showing it. Papa says Eli has all his feelings stuck inside where they get tangled up, and that's why he acts grumpy when he really means something nice. Elena wondered what it said about Rowan, that he'd apparently spent time analyzing his son's emotional patterns and explaining them to his 6-year-old daughter. Most men she'd known at the orphanage, the visiting board members, the occasional charitable donor, treated children's feelings like inconvenient weather that would eventually pass. By mid-morning, Rowan and Eli had left for town in the wagon, leaving Elena alone with Rose. The little girl attached herself to Elena's side like a burr, chattering constantly while Elena explored the cabin more thoroughly. The mending pile was, if anything, worse than Rowan had suggested. Not 3 feet high, more like 4. Shirts with missing buttons, torn seams, holes worn through from hard use. Rose's dresses were all too short, the hems let down as far as they could go and then some. Even the quilts showed signs of hard living and inadequate repair. Your papa wasn't exaggerating, Elena murmured, sorting through the damage. He tries, Rose said loyally. But he says sewing is like trying to teach rocks to dance. His fingers are too big and the thread is too small and nothing ever goes where it's supposed to. Elena could picture it. Rowan's work-roughened hands struggling with delicate needlework, probably squinting in bad light while his children slept, trying to keep their clothes functional through sheer stubborn determination. The image made her chest tight again. She pushed the feeling aside and focused on practical matters. The mending would take weeks to finish properly, but she could make a dent in it. And in the meantime, Rose clearly needed something to do that didn't involve following Elena from room to room, asking questions. Do you know how to sew? Elena asked. Rose's eyes went wide. Mama was teaching me before she got sick, but I'm not very good. That's fine. Not very good is how everyone starts. Elena found a shirt with a missing button. Easy work, good for small hands. Come sit with me. I'll show you how to reattach this. They settled on the bench near the window where the light was best, and Elena guided Rose through the process of threading a needle, knotting the end, and pushing it through the fabric. Rose's hands were clumsy at first, the needle wobbling as she tried to control it, but she stuck with it with fierce concentration. There, Elena said when the button was finally secure, if not particularly neat. You did it. Rose held up the shirt like a trophy. I did it. Wait until Papa sees. He'll be very proud. Elena reached for another item from the pile, one of Eli's shirts with a torn seam. Want to try another one? They worked together in comfortable silence, broken only by Rose's occasional questions and observations. The child had clearly been starved for female attention, and she soaked up Elena's presence like dry earth soaking up rain. It should have been uncomfortable. Elena was a stranger, temporary help, not a replacement for the mother Rose had lost. But Rose didn't seem to see it that way. She just saw someone who would sit with her and teach her and listen when she talked about her carved animals or the stories her mother used to tell. Miss Elena? Rose's voice was quiet, uncertain. Yes? Are you going to marry Papa? Elena's hand stilled on the fabric. What? No, why would you think that? Because you're here, and you're nice, and Papa needs someone. Rose didn't look up from her sewing, but her little shoulders were tense. Eli says people in town think that's why you're staying, that Papa brought you home to be his new wife. Of course, that's what the town thought. Elena had been naive to imagine any other interpretation. A widower takes in a rejected mail-order bride. There was only one story people would create from those facts. Your Papa offered me a room because I needed help, Elena said carefully. That's all. He doesn't want to marry me, and I don't want to marry him. We're just people helping each other for a little while. Oh, Rose's voice was small, disappointed. Does that bother you? Rose was quiet for a long moment, her needle pushing through fabric with determined focus. I miss having a mama. I know Papa tries, and Eli helps, but it's not the same. Papa doesn't know how to braid hair right, and he can't sew, and sometimes I want to talk about girl things, and there's nobody to talk to. Elena's throat felt tight. I'm sorry. It's not your fault Mama died. Rose finally looked up, her eyes shiny but not quite crying. I just thought maybe, if you stayed, it might be nice to have someone again, even if you're not really a mama, just someone. Rose, I know you're going to leave. Everyone leaves eventually. Rose returned to her sewing, her small hands moving with more confidence now. But while you're here, could you maybe teach me things? Like sewing and cooking and the other stuff Mama would have taught me if she was still alive? Elena wanted to say no, wanted to maintain distance, keep things professional, not let this child get attached to someone who would be gone as soon as she saved enough money for train fare to somewhere else. But Rose was looking at her with such careful hope, trying so hard not to ask for too much. And Elena remembered being that age and desperate for any scrap of kindness from the older girls at the orphanage. I can do that, Elena said quietly. While I'm here, I'll teach you whatever you want to learn. Rose's smile was like sunrise. Thank you. They sewed until Elena's back ached from bending over the mending, making their way through buttons and simple repairs while Rose chattered about everything and nothing. The child had an endless capacity for conversation, jumping from topic to topic with the randomness of a butterfly, and Elena found herself relaxing into the rhythm of it. When Rowan and Eli returned in the early afternoon, the wagon was loaded with supplies and the air between father and son had thawed slightly. Eli actually looked at Elena when he came inside, thrusting a wrapped bundle into her hands with awkward grace. Mrs. Patterson said this was good fabric for everyday dresses. And there's thread and needles and stuff. He shifted his weight, uncomfortable. She asked a lot of questions about you. I told her to mind her own business. Rowan winced. Eli, we talked about being diplomatic. She was being nosy. Someone had to say it. You could have said it more politely. I was polite. I didn't tell her what I really thought. Elena bit back a laugh and unwrapped the bundle. The fabric was sturdy cotton in a serviceable gray blue. Practical, hard-wearing, exactly the kind of thing that would survive frontier life. Mrs. Patterson had also included far more thread than necessary, in multiple colors, and a small packet of needles in various sizes. This is too much, Elena protested. Mrs. Patterson said it's a welcome gift from the ladies' auxiliary. Rowan started unloading supplies from the wagon, which I suspect means it's charity dressed up as hospitality, but she seemed genuine about it. Or she wants gossip ammunition, Eli muttered. Eli. What? It's true. Mrs. Patterson lives for gossip. Everyone knows it. Rowan looked like he wanted to argue, but couldn't quite find the grounds to do so. Elena hid her smile and carried the fabric inside, already mentally planning how to cut it to get 2 dresses from the yardage. Maybe 3 if she was careful. Lunch was leftover porridge fried into cakes with a little butter, which Rose pronounced fancy restaurant food with absolute seriousness. Eli ate 3 helpings without commenting, which Elena was learning was his version of approval. Rowan praised the efficiency of using leftovers, then ruined it by trying to pay Elena for her cooking. "I'm not paying you," Elena said firmly, pushing the coins back across the table. "I'm helping because I'm staying here and eating your food. That's not work. That's basic decency. You're doing far more than basic decency requires. Then consider it payment for the room, and the fabric, and the fact that you saved me from freezing to death on a train platform." Elena stood, gathering plates with finality. "We're not having this argument every day, Rowan. I help around the house, you provide shelter. That's the arrangement. Accept it." Rowan opened his mouth, probably to argue, but Eli interrupted. "She's right, Papa. You're being weird about it." "I'm not being weird." "You are. Just let her help. It's better than watching you burn dinner 3 nights a week." "I don't burn dinner 3 nights a week." 4 nights, then." Eli stood, carrying his own plate to the wash basin. "Can I go work on my schoolwork now, or are you going to argue about that too?" Rowan sighed the deep sigh of a parent who knew he was losing an argument. "Go ahead, but finish the arithmetic before you start reading." Eli made a face but nodded, disappearing into his room. Rose followed moments later, leaving Elena and Rowan alone in the kitchen. "He's not usually that mouthy," Rowan said apologetically. "He's testing boundaries. That's normal." Elena started washing dishes, falling back into the rhythm she'd established that morning. "And he's not wrong. You're being weird about accepting help. I don't want you to feel obligated." "I don't feel obligated. I feel useful. There's a difference." Elena glanced at him, noting the tension in his shoulders. "Does it bother you, having me here?" "No, that's not—" Rowan ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "I just don't want you to think I brought you here expecting free labor. That's not why I offered the room." "I know. You offered because it was the right thing to do. You've said that several times now." Elena dried her hands and turned to face him directly. "But here's the thing, Rowan. Accepting help is also the right thing to do. You need someone who can sew and cook and help with the children. I need a place to stay while I figure out what comes next. This arrangement benefits both of us. Stop trying to make it into charity when it's just practical." Rowan looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. "You're more stubborn than you look. I spent 15 years in an orphanage. Stubborn was mandatory for survival." Elena returned to the dishes. "Now, are you going to stand there looking uncomfortable, or are you going to tell me what else needs doing around here?" The corner of Rowan's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "The porch step is loose. Has been for months. I keep meaning to fix it, but you're one person managing everything alone." Elena nodded. "Do you have spare wood and nails? You're not fixing the porch step." "Why not? I can use a hammer." "It's heavy work. I'm stronger than I look. And before you argue, remember that I just won the last argument. You're 0 for 2 today." Elena raised an eyebrow in challenge. "Do you have the supplies or not?" Rowan stared at her, clearly torn between traditional notions of propriety and the practical reality that the porch step did need fixing, and she was offering to do it. Finally, he sighed in defeat. "Wood's in the shed out back. Hammer and nails are on the workbench. But if you hurt yourself, I'm going to feel terrible." "Then I won't hurt myself." Elena dried her hands and headed for the door. "Where's the shed?" She found it easily enough. A small structure built with the same careful craftsmanship as the cabin. Inside, everything was organized with the neat precision of someone who spent their life working with tools. She located the wood, hammer, and nails without difficulty, then carried everything to the front porch. The step was indeed loose, wobbling dangerously when she tested it. The nails had worked free over time and weather, and the wood itself was starting to split. A simple fix if she could pry the old step free and nail down a replacement. Elena was halfway through removing the damaged board when she heard voices from the road. She looked up to see 2 women approaching on foot, Mrs. Patterson from the general store, recognizable from town, and another woman Elena didn't know. "Perfect. Exactly what she needed, an audience. "Good afternoon," Mrs. Patterson called out, her voice friendly but her eyes sharp with curiosity. "Heard we had a new resident in town and thought we'd come by to say hello properly." Elena stood, wiping her hands on her already dirty dress. "Mrs. Patterson? That's kind of you." "This is Martha Reeves," Mrs. Patterson indicated her companion, a thin woman with a pinched mouth and calculating eyes. "She runs the boarding house in town." "Nice to meet you," Elena said politely, though she suspected this visit had nothing to do with hospitality and everything to do with gathering information to spread around Cedar Bluff. "We brought bread," Martha said, holding up a cloth-wrapped loaf. "Fresh from this morning. Thought you might appreciate it, being new and all." The bread was clearly an admission ticket, payment for the right to ask invasive questions. Elena had seen this dynamic play out 100 times at the orphanage when charitable ladies came to visit. They brought small gifts and expected detailed gratitude in return. "That's very thoughtful," Elena said, accepting the loaf. "Would you like to come inside?" "Oh, we don't want to impose—" Mrs. Patterson was already moving toward the door. "But perhaps just for a moment." They settled in the main room, and within seconds Rose had appeared, drawn by the sound of visitors. She pressed against Elena's side with the casual possessiveness of a child who'd already decided Elena belonged to her. "My goodness, Rose, you've gotten so big," Mrs. Patterson said, with the forced enthusiasm adults used when they couldn't think of anything genuine to say to children. "I'm the same size as yesterday when you saw me in the store," Rose said with brutal honesty. Martha Reeves made a sound that might have been a laugh or disapproval. Children are so literal at that age. Elena bit back a defense of Rose and focused on being a polite host, putting water on for tea and slicing the bread they'd brought. The women watched her move around the kitchen with interest that bordered on intrusive. "So you came from Pennsylvania," Mrs. Patterson said. "Long journey." "Very long. And you were supposed to marry Harold Boone." This from Martha, her tone suggesting she was broaching a delicate subject. "That was the plan, yes." "Such a shame what happened. Harold can be difficult." Mrs. Patterson tried to sound sympathetic, but there was avid curiosity in her eyes. It must have been terribly humiliating. "It wasn't pleasant," Elena said mildly, pouring hot water over tea leaves with steady hands. "And then Rowan just brought you home?" Martha's voice climbed with skepticism. "Out of the kindness of his heart?" "He offered me a place to stay, yes." "How generous." Martha's tone suggested she found it anything but generous. "Of course people are talking. A young woman, living alone with a widowed man and his children. It's bound to cause speculation." "Let them speculate." Elena set teacups on the table with perhaps more force than necessary. "I needed help. Mr. Mercer provided it. I'm helping with household tasks in return. It's a practical arrangement that harms no one." "But surely you can see how it looks," Mrs. Patterson said, leaning forward conspiratorially. "A mail-order bride rejected by one man, immediately taken in by another. People will naturally assume—" "People can assume whatever they want. That doesn't make their assumptions true." Elena sat down, meeting both women's eyes steadily. "I appreciate your concern, but there's nothing inappropriate happening in this house. I have my own room. Mr. Mercer has been nothing but respectful. His children need help that I'm qualified to provide. That's the entire story." Martha sniffed, clearly unsatisfied with this answer. "Still, for the sake of propriety." "Propriety?" Elena let some of her frustration show. "Harold Boone humiliated me in front of the entire town. He abandoned me on a train platform in December with nowhere to go, but you're worried about propriety because someone offered me shelter?" The room went quiet. Rose pressed closer to Elena's side, and Elena realized the child was trembling slightly. Whether from anger at the women or fear of conflict, she couldn't tell. Mrs. Patterson had the grace to look uncomfortable. "We're not trying to upset you, dear. We just want to make sure you understand how things work in a town like this. Reputation matters." "I'm aware." Elena's voice was ice. "I've had my reputation discussed by strangers since I was 10 years old. Every orphan does. People love to speculate about why you're alone, what must be wrong with you, whether you're worthy of charity." She stood, making it clear the visit was over. "Thank you for the bread." "It was kind of you to bring it." Martha set down her teacup with a sharp click. "We're only trying to help." "Then help by not spreading gossip about things you don't understand." Elena moved to the door, opening it pointedly. Good afternoon, ladies. They left in a huff of offended propriety, muttering to each other as they walked back toward town. Elena closed the door and leaned against it, suddenly exhausted. They were mean, Rose said quietly. They were nosy, Elena corrected. There's a difference, though sometimes it's hard to tell. Are you really going to stay? Even though people are talking? Elena looked down at Rose's worried face and made a decision she hoped she wouldn't regret. I'm staying, at least for now. People can talk all they want. It won't change anything. Rose's face broke into a relieved smile, and she threw her arms around Elena's waist in an impulsive hug. Good. I like having you here. Elena froze for a moment, then slowly returned the embrace, her hand settling on Rose's small shoulders. This was dangerous. Getting attached meant getting hurt when she eventually left, but Rose was warm and real and desperate for affection, and Elena couldn't quite bring herself to push her away. When Rowan came in from the workshop an hour later, he found Elena back on the porch, hammering the new step into place with grim determination. He watched for a moment before speaking. Mrs. Patterson and Martha Reeves came by. I know, they brought bread and judgment in equal measures. Rowan winced. What did they say? The usual, that people are talking, that it looks inappropriate, that I should be concerned about my reputation. Elena drove another nail home with more force than strictly necessary. I told them my reputation survived worse than accepting help from a decent man. I'm sorry, I should have anticipated. Stop apologizing for things that aren't your fault. Elena sat back on her heels, looking up at him. You offered help when I needed it. If that makes people uncomfortable, that's their problem, not yours. Rowan was quiet for a moment. You're tougher than most people give you credit for. I've had to be. Elena stood, testing the step. It held firm, no wobble. There, fixed. Thank you, Rowan's voice was sincere. For the step. And for everything else. You've been here one day and the place already feels different. Different good or different bad? Different good. The kind of different I didn't realize we needed. He cleared his throat, suddenly awkward. Eli asked if you could help him with his arithmetic tonight. He's been struggling with long division, and he's too proud to ask me because he thinks he should be able to figure it out himself. I'd be happy to help. And Rose apparently wants you to teach her how to make bread. Fair warning, she's stubborn about following directions and will probably make a mess. Elena smiled despite herself. I can handle stubborn and messy. I spent 15 years with 60 children who specialized in both. That evening unfolded with a domestic ease that should have felt strange but somehow didn't. Elena helped Eli with arithmetic, patiently walking him through the steps he'd been getting wrong, and watched his frustration slowly transform into understanding. Rose shadowed her through dinner preparations, asking endless questions and getting flour absolutely everywhere. The four of them ate together at the table, venison stew that Elena had made from supplies she'd found in the root cellar, with the bread Mrs. Patterson had brought. It was simple food, but Eli asked for seconds, and Rose declared it better than restaurant food even, with absolute conviction. After dinner, Rose begged Elena to teach her one of the songs from the orphanage, something cheerful and silly that the younger children had liked. Elena taught her a clapping game song, and soon Rose was giggling while trying to coordinate the hand movements with the lyrics. Even Eli cracked a smile, though he tried to hide it by pretending intense focus on his book. And Rowan watched it all with an expression Elena couldn't quite read. Something between gratitude and sadness, like he was glad for the change but mourning what the change represented. When the children finally went to bed, after Rose extracted a promise that Elena would teach her more sewing tomorrow, Elena found herself alone with Rowan in the main room. The fire crackled between them, and for a long moment neither spoke. Thank you, Rowan said finally, for being patient with them. They haven't had... He trailed off, searching for words. They haven't had this. Someone who pays attention and cares and makes things feel normal. They're good children. It's not hard to be patient with them. Eli's been testing you, waiting for you to fail or leave or prove you're not trustworthy. I know. I would do the same in his position. Elena looked at the fire instead of at Rowan, finding it easier to speak without making eye contact. He'll either decide I'm safe or he won't. Either way, I won't take it personally. And Rose is getting attached. I know that too. Elena's voice was quiet. I'm trying not to encourage it, but she needs someone, and I'm here. It's hard to maintain distance when a child is grieving. Rowan was silent for a long moment. What happens when you leave? When you've saved enough money or found another situation? I don't know, Elena admitted. I'm trying not to hurt them, but I can't stay here forever, and pretending otherwise would be worse. No one's asking you to stay forever. Then what are you asking? Rowan looked at her finally, his dark eyes unreadable in the firelight. I'm not sure. Maybe just to be honest with them. With all of us. If you're planning to leave as soon as possible, they should know. If you might stay longer, they should know that too. Elena considered the question carefully. I don't have a plan yet. I need to find work, save money, figure out where I can go that won't end up worse than Cedar Bluff. That could take weeks or months. I honestly don't know. She met his eyes. Is that honest enough? It's enough. Rowan stood, suddenly restless. I should let you sleep. Tomorrow we can talk about what kind of work might be available in town, if you're serious about wanting to earn money. I'm serious. Then we'll figure it out. He paused at the door to his room, looking back. Elena, for what it's worth, I'm glad you're here. Not just for the help, for this. Whatever this is. He disappeared before Elena could respond, leaving her alone with the dying fire and the weight of words she didn't know how to answer. She sat there for a long time, listening to the cabin settle around her, and wondered what she'd gotten herself into. 3 weeks passed in a rhythm that felt almost normal, which should have been a warning sign, but somehow wasn't. Elena fell into the household routine with the ease of someone who'd spent her whole life adapting to new situations. She woke before dawn, started the fire, made breakfast while Rowan handled the outdoor chores. The children grew accustomed to her presence the way they might grow accustomed to a new piece of furniture, first with caution, then with acceptance, then with the kind of casual ownership that came from familiarity. Rose stopped asking if Elena was staying and started assuming it. She appeared at Elena's side every morning with her tangled hair and expectant expression, waiting for braids that Elena had learned to weave quickly despite never having done them before. She chattered through breakfast and lessons and chores, filling the cabin with constant noise that somehow made the silence less heavy when it came. Eli remained wary, but his wariness had softened into something closer to grudging respect. He still tested Elena, leaving his schoolwork scattered instead of organized, speaking curtly when politeness would serve better, watching for signs that she would snap or quit or prove herself unworthy of the space she occupied. But when she helped him understand a particularly difficult mathematics problem, he'd thanked her quietly. And when she'd mended his favorite shirt, the one with the tear he'd been trying to hide, he'd worn it the next day without comment, which Elena had learned was Eli's version of gratitude. The town continued to talk, but Elena had stopped caring about the whispers that followed her on her weekly trips to the general store. Mrs. Patterson remained professionally friendly while asking invasive questions. Martha Reeves watched with disapproving eyes every time Elena passed the boarding house. The men at the saloon fell silent when she walked by, their speculation obvious even without words. Let them talk. Elena had survived worse than gossip. But there was one person in Cedar Bluff whose attention felt different, and that was Harold Boone. Elena saw him occasionally when she went to town, a glimpse across the street, a figure in the distance climbing into his wagon. He never approached, never acknowledged her existence, but she felt his eyes on her sometimes, watching, assessing, like he was calculating something she couldn't quite understand. She mentioned it to Rowan one evening while they sat by the fire after the children had gone to bed. These quiet hours had become routine too, a space where they could talk about practical things like household needs and children's progress, but also about larger things like the future and the past and the strange circumstances that had brought them together. Boone's been watching you? Rowan's voice went flat, dangerous in a way Elena had never heard before. Not watching exactly, just noticing. He's probably curious about whether I've left town yet. Elena kept her tone light, not wanting to make it into something more than it was. It doesn't matter. It matters if he's making you uncomfortable. Everything in this town makes me uncomfortable. Boone is just one more source of it. Elena pulled thread through the shirt she was mending. One of Rowan's this time, the sleeve torn from some accident in the workshop. He rejected me publicly. He's probably entitled to some curiosity about what happened to the woman he threw away. Rowan's jaw tightened. He's not entitled to anything regarding you. He gave up any claim when he walked away on that platform. The vehemence in his voice surprised Elena. She looked up from her mending to find Rowan staring into the fire, his hands clenched on the arms of his chair. "It bothers you," she said quietly. "What he did? Of course it bothers me. It should bother anyone with a conscience." Rowan's voice was rough. "You traveled across the country on a promise. You gave up everything for a future he offered, and he destroyed it in front of an audience because he decided you weren't worth the trouble. That's not just cruel, it's cowardly." Elena set down her mending, caught off guard by the anger in his words. "I survived it." "That doesn't make it acceptable." "No, but it makes it done." Elena chose her words carefully. "I can't change what happened on that platform. I can only control what happens next, and dwelling on Boone's cruelty doesn't help me move forward." Rowan looked at her then, really looked at her, and Elena saw something shift in his expression. "How do you do that? Let go of things that would eat other people alive?" "Practice." Elena picked up her mending again, using the familiar motion to steady herself. "At the orphanage, if you held on to every hurt, every humiliation, every casual cruelty, you'd drown in it. So you learn to let things go, not because they don't matter, but because holding on to them costs more than releasing them. That's not the same as forgetting." "No, I remember everything. I just don't let it own me." Elena finished the seam and bit off the thread. "There, your shirt is whole again." Rowan took it from her, his fingers brushing hers for just a moment, calloused and warm and solid. "Thank you. It's just mending." "It's not just mending." Rowan's voice was soft now, the anger drained away. "You've done more for this family in 3 weeks than I managed in 2 years. The children are happier. The house feels like a home instead of a place we're just surviving in. You've given us something I didn't know we were missing." Elena's chest tightened dangerously. This was the kind of conversation that led to complications, to expectations, to crossing lines that should remain firmly drawn. "I'm helping because you're letting me stay. That's all." "Is it?" The question hung between them like smoke. Elena didn't answer because she didn't have an answer that wouldn't make everything more complicated than it already was. The next morning dawned gray and threatening snow. Rowan left early for a job in town, some repair work at the church that needed finishing before the next storm hit. Eli went with him, eager to escape his schoolwork and learn carpentry instead. That left Elena alone with Rose, who had developed a cold and was consequently fussy and demanding in the way only 6 6-year-olds could manage. "My throat hurts," Rose whined for the 10th time that hour. "I know, sweetheart. That's why you're drinking the honey tea." Elena felt Rose's forehead again, warm, but not dangerously so. Just a common cold, the kind children got every winter. "I don't like honey tea. It tastes like medicine." "That's because it is medicine. Drink it anyway." Rose made a face but obeyed, sipping the tea with exaggerated suffering. Elena hid her smile and went back to the bread she was kneading. The dough was nearly ready for rising, and she wanted to get it in the oven before... A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Elena wiped flour from her hands and went to answer it, expecting perhaps Mrs. Chen from the neighboring property or one of the other women from town bringing more thinly veiled charity and thick questions. Instead, she found Harold Boone standing on the porch. He looked exactly as he had on the platform. Heavy jaw, hard eyes, expensive coat that marked him as a man of means. But up close, without the crowd and the public performance, Elena could see other things too. The lines around his mouth that spoke of habitual dissatisfaction. The way he held himself with aggressive certainty, like someone constantly braced for a fight. "Miss Whitmore." His voice was formal, almost polite. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." Every instinct Elena had honed over 15 years screamed at her to shut the door in his face, but curiosity and perhaps a stubborn desire to not show fear kept her rooted in place. "Mr. Boone, I'm surprised to see you." She kept her voice neutral, giving nothing away. "I imagine you are." Harold's eyes moved past her, taking in the cabin's interior with undisguised assessment. "Is Mercer home?" "He's in town. Working." Elena shifted slightly, blocking his view of Rose, who was watching from the bench with wide, curious eyes. Did you need something? I wanted to speak with you, privately. Harold glanced at Rose pointedly. Elena's spine stiffened. Anything you have to say to me can be said in front of a 6-year-old, or not said at all. Harold's mouth tightened with irritation, but he held on to his careful politeness. Very well, I came to apologize for my behavior at the train station. It was ungentlemanly. The word hung in the air like a bad smell. Ungentlemanly. Not cruel, not devastating, not publicly humiliating, just ungentlemanly, as if he'd used the wrong fork at dinner. I see, Elena said carefully. I was hasty in my judgment. I didn't give you a fair chance to prove yourself suitable. Harold straightened his shoulders, and Elena realized with growing disbelief what was coming. I'm prepared to honor our original agreement. You can come to the ranch, we'll proceed with the marriage arrangement as planned, and we can put this unfortunate misunderstanding behind us. Elena stared at him, unable to process the sheer audacity of what he'd just proposed. You're offering to marry me. That was always the arrangement. The arrangement you publicly rejected, in front of the entire town. After I traveled 23 days to get here. Elena's voice was very calm, very controlled. And now you want to pretend that never happened? I'm willing to overlook the time you've spent at Mercer's cabin. Harold's tone suggested this was a generous concession. I understand you had limited options, but the situation has gone on long enough. It's time you came to the ranch where you belong. Where I belong? Elena repeated the words slowly, tasting their implication. You think I belong to you? We had a contract. You voided that contract when you walked away from me on the platform. Harold's carefully maintained politeness began to crack. I paid the agency fee. I have a right. You have no rights regarding me. Elena's voice was ice now, all pretense of civility abandoned. You made your decision. You don't get to unmake it just because you've had time to reconsider. You're living in another man's house, doing his domestic work, raising his children. Harold's eyes narrowed. People are talking, Miss Whitmore. They're saying things about you and Mercer that aren't decent. If you had any sense, you'd see that marriage to me is the only way to salvage your reputation. My reputation survived being publicly rejected by you. It can survive gossip. Elena started to close the door. This conversation is over. Harold's hand shot out, catching the door before she could shut it. His careful politeness evaporated completely, replaced by something uglier. You think Mercer is going to marry you? A man with 2 children and a dead wife he's still mourning? You're a convenience to him, nothing more. Free labor with a pretty face. The moment you become more trouble than you're worth, he'll send you packing, just like I did. The words hit harder than they should have, finding the fears Elena had been carefully not examining. But she refused to let Harold see that he'd landed a blow. Get your hand off my door. I'm offering you a future, a real home, not temporary charity from a man who'll never see you as more than hired help. Harold leaned closer, and Elena could smell whiskey on his breath despite the early hour. You're an orphan with no family and no prospects. I'm your best option, and you know it. My best option was dying of exposure on that train platform. Elena's voice was deadly quiet. You don't even make the list. She shoved the door hard, forcing Harold to pull his hand back or risk broken fingers. The door slammed shut, and Elena threw the bolt with shaking hands. From the bench, Rose's voice was small and frightened. Miss Elena? Who was that man? Elena took a breath, then another, willing her hands to stop trembling before she turned around. Someone who doesn't matter. Come on, let's finish your tea. But Rose wasn't distracted. He scared me. He's gone now. Are you going to leave us? To go to his ranch? The question punched the air from Elena's lungs. She crossed to the bench and knelt in front of Rose, taking the child's small hands in hers. No, I'm not going anywhere with that man. I promise. But what if Papa makes you go? What if he doesn't want you here anymore? Rose, Eli says you're going to leave anyway, that everyone leaves eventually. He says it's stupid to get attached because you'll just go away like Mama did. Rose's eyes were shiny with tears. I don't want you to go away. Elena pulled the child into a hug, feeling Rose's small body shake with suppressed sobs. This was exactly what she'd been trying to avoid. This attachment, this dependence, this inevitable heartbreak. But it was too late now. Rose had already decided Elena was hers, and pushing her away would only hurt her more. I'm not planning to leave, Elena said quietly into Rose's hair. Not right now. And when I do eventually go, because you're right, I probably will someday, it won't be because I don't care about you. Do you understand? Rose nodded against Elena's shoulder, but her grip didn't loosen. They stayed like that until Rose's breathing evened out and her tears dried. Elena made more honey tea and told Rose a story from the orphanage, carefully edited to remove the darker parts, leaving only the adventure of children making their own fun despite circumstances. By the time Rowan and Eli returned, Rose had fallen asleep on the bench, wrapped in a quilt and clutching one of her carved animals. Elena was back at her bread-making, kneading dough with more force than strictly necessary. Rowan took one look at her face and his expression darkened. What happened? Elena glanced at Eli, who was hanging up his coat with studied casualness that suggested he was absolutely listening to every word. Rose is sick, just a cold, but she's been fussy all day. That's not what I'm asking about. Rowan crossed to her, lowering his voice. You look like someone who's been in a fight. Harold Boone came by. The temperature in the cabin dropped 10 degrees. Rowan's voice went dangerously quiet. When? This morning. Maybe 2 hours ago. Elena shaped the dough into loaves with mechanical precision. He wanted to apologize for his behavior at the station. Apologize. Rowan's tone made it clear what he thought of that. And then he offered to honor the original marriage agreement, said I could come to his ranch and we'd proceed as planned. Elena finally looked up, meeting Rowan's eyes. I declined. What did he say when you declined? Elena hesitated, not wanting to repeat Harold's uglier accusations about Rowan's motives, but Rowan was watching her with intensity that demanded honesty. He said I was making a mistake, that you'd eventually send me away, that marrying him was my only real option. Elena kept her voice level. I told him to leave. And did he? Eventually. Rowan's jaw worked like he was chewing through something bitter. Did he touch you? Threaten you? No, he just talked. Said things designed to make me doubt myself in this arrangement. Elena set the loaves in their pans, ready for rising. It didn't work. Eli had stopped pretending not to listen. He stood by the door, his young face tight with anger. That's the man who left you at the station? Yes, Elena said quietly. And he came here while Papa was gone. Eli's hands clenched into fists. That's coward behavior. Eli, Rowan started. It is. He waited until you weren't here to protect her. That's what cowards do. Eli looked at Elena with something fierce and protective in his eyes. Did he scare you? Elena considered lying, then decided Eli deserved honesty. A little. Not because I thought he'd hurt me physically, but because he said things that touched on fears I already had. About leaving? About a lot of things. Elena wiped flour from her hand, suddenly exhausted. But they're my fears to manage, not his to exploit. Rowan was still standing rigid with barely controlled anger. I'm going to town. Rowan, don't! I'm going to make it very clear to Harold Boone that he's not welcome on my property, and that if he comes near you again, we're going to have a problem. Rowan grabbed his coat from the hook. Eli, you're in charge until I get back. Papa, please. Elena caught his arm. It's not worth it. He's not worth it. That's where you're wrong. Rowan's voice was steel. He humiliated you once. I stood there and did nothing because I didn't know you yet, but I know you now. And he doesn't get to show up here and make you feel small. Not anymore. He left before Elena could argue further, the door closing with controlled force that was somehow worse than slamming. Eli watched his father go with approval in his eyes. Papa's going to punch him, he said with satisfaction. Your father is going to have a conversation with him, Elena corrected, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. Either way, Mr. Boone deserves it. Eli moved to check on his sleeping sister, adjusting her quilt with surprising gentleness. He shouldn't have come here. This is our home. He stopped abruptly, seeming to catch himself. I'm what? Eli's face went red. You're helping us. That makes you, I don't know, part of things. And people who are part of things should be protected from men like Harold Boone. It was possibly the longest speech Eli had ever made to her, and definitely the first time he'd explicitly included her in the family circle. Elena felt something crack in her chest, the careful distance she'd been trying to maintain, the wall she'd built between temporary and permanent. Thank you, Eli, she said quietly. He shrugged, suddenly awkward. It's just facts. Rose likes you, Papa likes you, even I. He trailed off, unable or unwilling to finish the sentence. Anyway, Mr. Boone is stupid if he thinks you'd choose him over us. Eli disappeared into his room before Elena could respond, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the bread that needed attention. She spent the next hour doing busy work, covering the loaves to rise, tidying the kitchen, checking on Rose, anything to keep her hands occupied and her mind away from worrying about what Rowan was doing in town. The sun was beginning its descent toward the mountains when she finally heard the wagon returning. Rowan came inside looking grim but unbloodied, which Elena took as a good sign. He hung up his coat, washed his hands in the basin, and accepted the coffee Elena poured without a word. Well? She finally asked when the silence stretched too long. Boone and I had a conversation. A conversation with fists or words? Words. Though it was a near thing. Rowan's mouth was tight. I explained that you're under my protection, that he has no claim on you, no right to contact you, and no business coming to my property. I also explained what would happen if he ignored this explanation. What did he say? That he paid good money to the agency and he has a right to recoup his investment. Rowan's voice dripped disgust. He actually called you an investment, like you were livestock he'd purchased and was entitled to collect. Elena sat down heavily. Some men see women that way. Well, this man explained that human beings aren't investments and that the agency contract became void the moment he rejected you publicly. Rowan took a long drink of coffee. He didn't like hearing it, but he heard it. And you think he'll stay away? I think he'll try something else. Rowan's eyes were worried. Boone's not the type to accept defeat gracefully. He'll calculate another angle, find another approach. We need to be careful. The "we" in that sentence didn't escape Elena's notice. Somewhere in the last 3 weeks, she'd stopped being charity case and temporary help and become part of a "we" that included protection and concern and something that felt dangerously like belonging. I can't ask you to fight my battles, Elena said quietly. You didn't ask. I chose. Rowan set down his coffee and looked at her directly. Elena, I need you to understand something. What I said to Boone about you being under my protection, that wasn't just words to make him back off. I meant it. You're living in my home, helping raise my children, making this family work better than it has in 2 years. That means something, and I protect what matters to me. The words hung between them, heavier than they should have been. Elena wanted to deflect, to make light of it, to retreat behind the careful distance that kept everything safe and uncomplicated. But she was tired of being careful, tired of maintaining walls that were crumbling anyway. It matters to me too, she said quietly. All of this. You and the children and this strange life I've fallen into. It matters more than it probably should. Rowan's expression softened. Why shouldn't it matter? You're allowed to care about things, Elena. You're allowed to want to stay. Am I? Elena's voice was barely a whisper. Because staying means getting attached, and attachment means it will hurt when everything inevitably falls apart. What makes you so sure it will fall apart? Because it always does. Every good thing I've ever had has been temporary. Elena stood, needing movement to handle the emotion swelling in her chest. My parents died. The orphanage was never meant to be permanent. The future Harold Boone promise disappeared in one sentence. I've learned not to trust good things because they never last. Some things last. Rowan stood too, closing the distance between them. My children are still here. This cabin is still standing. The work I've built over 10 years is still mine. Not everything disappears. But some things do. Your wife, Sarah, died. That's true. And it nearly destroyed me and the children. Rowan's voice was rough with old pain. But we survived. We're still here, and now you're here, and maybe that's not temporary. Maybe it's just the next part of the story. Elena looked up at him. This man who'd shown her kindness for no reason except that it was right, who'd defended her against a town's gossip and a rejected suitor's anger, who'd somehow become essential in 3 short weeks. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. How to be part of something without waiting for it to end. Neither do I. Rowan's smile was small and sad. Sarah was the only family I had besides my children. I don't know how to let someone new in, but I'm trying. We're both trying. Maybe that's enough. Before Elena could respond, Rose stirred on the bench, her small voice calling out, "Papa, Miss Elena?" The moment broke. Rowan stepped back and Elena moved to tend to Rose, who was awake and cranky and demanding attention. The conversation ended before it could reach any kind of conclusion, leaving Elena with more questions than answers and a heart that felt dangerously full. That night, after the children were asleep and Rowan had retired to his room, Elena lay in her bed staring at the ceiling and thinking about temporary versus permanent, about protection and belonging and the terrifying possibility that maybe, just maybe, she'd found something worth staying for. The thought should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing the fall might destroy her but unable to step back from the edge. Because in 3 weeks, Cedar Bluff had stopped being a temporary refuge and started feeling like something dangerously close to home. Rose had become the little sister she'd never had. Eli had transformed from hostile stranger to grudging ally to something that might eventually become affection. And Rowan was the biggest danger of all. Because when he looked at her with those steady eyes and called her someone under his protection, Elena wanted to believe it, wanted to trust that this time the good thing wouldn't disappear, wanted to let herself imagine a future that extended beyond the next few weeks or months. But wanting something didn't make it safe, and believing in permanence didn't prevent loss. Elena pulled the quilt up to her chin and closed her eyes, willing sleep to come and quiet the questions that had no good answers. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Harold Boone wasn't finished. Rowan was right about that. Men like Boone didn't accept defeat gracefully. He would try something else, find another angle, create new problems to solve. But for tonight, Elena was safe in a warm cabin with a door that locked, and people who cared whether she lived or died. For someone who'd spent 15 years in an orphanage and traveled across the country to a rejection, that was more than she'd dared to hope for. It would have to be enough, even if her foolish heart was starting to hope for more. Harold Boone waited exactly 1 week before making his next move. Elena was in town on a Friday morning, her arms full of fabric from Mrs. Patterson's shop, material for new curtains that Rose had begged for after seeing them in the mercantile window. The spring thaw had started early, turning Cedar Bluff streets into rivers of mud that sucked at her boots with each step. She was concentrating on not dropping her parcels when a hand gripped her elbow. "Miss Whitmore, a moment of your time." Elena jerked away instinctively, nearly losing her balance in the process. Harold stood too close, his expensive coat somehow pristine despite the mud that coated everything else in town. "I have nothing to say to you, Mr. Boone." "Then just listen." Harold's voice was reasonable, almost friendly, which made Elena's skin crawl worse than anger would have. "I spoke with the agency. They confirmed that our contract is still valid since the marriage hasn't been officially dissolved. You dissolved it when you rejected me on the platform. That was a misunderstanding. The agency agrees that we should proceed as originally planned." Harold pulled a folded paper from his coat. "I have it in writing. You're contractually obligated to fulfill the terms." Elena stared at the paper, her heart pounding. "Show me." Harold unfolded it with theatrical care. Elena scanned the text quickly. Legal language dense enough to be meaningless, but the agency's letterhead looked legitimate. Her stomach dropped. "This doesn't mean anything," she said, hating how her voice shook. "You can't force me to marry you. I can sue for breach of contract. The agency advanced me considerable funds for your travel and placement. If you refuse to honor the agreement, you'll be liable for those costs." Harold's smile was cold. "Can you afford that, Miss Whitmore? Because I'm guessing Rowan Mercer can't. Not with a struggling carpentry business and 2 children to feed." The threat was clear. Comply or watch Rowan suffer the financial consequences of her choices. "You're bluffing, am I?" Harold tucked the paper back into his coat. "Test me and find out. Or come to the ranch tonight and we'll settle this properly. Your choice." He walked away before Elena could respond, his boots squelching through the mud with confident strides. Elena stood frozen in the street, her parcels clutched to her chest, trying to breathe past the panic squeezing her lungs. This couldn't be legal. Harold couldn't actually force her into marriage through some technicality in a mail-order bride contract. But what if he could sue? What if he really could make Rowan responsible for costs that would bankrupt a family already living carefully? She made it back to the cabin on autopilot, her mind spinning through scenarios and outcomes and increasingly desperate possibilities. Rowan was in his workshop, teaching Eli how to plane wood for a cabinet commission. Rose was at the neighbor's house, playing with Mrs. Chen's granddaughter. Elena should tell Rowan immediately. Should show him the letter, explain the threat, let him help figure out what to do. But the thought of watching him lose everything because of her, because he'd been kind enough to help a stranger, made her physically ill. She hid the parcels in her room and spent the afternoon cooking with mechanical precision, her hands moving through familiar tasks while her brain chased itself in circles. Dinner was quiet. Eli talked about the cabinet project with enthusiasm that still surprised Elena after 6 weeks of his guarded suspicion. Rose chattered about Mrs. Chen's granddaughter and the doll they'd been playing with. Rowan watched Elena with concern that she deflected with smiles that felt like lies. After the children went to bed, Rowan cornered her by the fire. "What happened in town?" "Nothing." The lie tasted like ash. "Elena." Rowan's voice was patient but firm. "You've been somewhere else all evening. You barely ate. Rose asked you the same question 3 times before you answered. What happened?" Elena stared at the fire, weighing honesty against protection. If she told him, he'd confront Harold. If he confronted Harold, the situation would escalate. If it escalated, "Harold stopped me on the street," she said finally. "He had a letter from the agency saying our contract is still valid." The temperature in the room dropped. "What kind of letter?" "Legal language. Something about the marriage not being officially dissolved and me being contractually obligated to fulfill the terms." Elena forced herself to look at Rowan. "He said if I don't comply, he can sue for the costs the agency advanced, and that you'd be liable." Rowan's expression went very still. "He's threatening to bankrupt me if you don't marry him." "Yes." "And you believed him?" "I don't know what to believe. I don't know anything about contracts or legal obligations or—" Elena's voice cracked. "I don't know if he's lying or if this is real, but I can't risk your family on a guess." "So what are you planning to do?" Elena had been asking herself that question for 6 hours. The answer made her want to vomit, but she couldn't see another path forward. "Go to his ranch, talk to him, see if there's a way to resolve this without destroying everything you've built." "Absolutely not." Rowan's voice was flat, final. "You're not going anywhere near Harold Boone." "I don't have a choice." "You have every choice." "This is extortion, Elena. It's not legal, and it's not binding, and I won't let you sacrifice yourself to a man who's already proven he's cruel." Rowan stood, pacing the small room with barely controlled anger. "We'll find a real lawyer. Get the contract examined by someone who actually knows the law instead of someone who's manipulating it for leverage." "That costs money we don't have." "Then we'll find the money." "With what?" Elena's frustration finally broke through. "You're barely making ends meet as it is, adding legal fees on top of everything else. I'll figure it out." "You can't just figure out money that doesn't exist." Elena was on her feet now too, all the fear and panic of the day transforming into anger because anger was easier to handle than helplessness. "I've watched you do mental arithmetic every time you buy supplies. I've seen how carefully you ration everything. I know exactly how thin your margins are, Rowan. You can't afford a lawyer any more than I can." "Then I'll sell something, the workshop tools, the extra wagon, something." "Oops." "No." Elena's voice cracked. "I won't let you dismantle your life for me. You've already given up too much." "I've given up nothing that mattered." "Your savings. The money you'd been saving for 2 years to rebuild your ranch dream. You gave it all to Harold to pay some imaginary debt. And now you want to sell the tools you need to support your children? For what? For me?" Elena was shaking now, the weight of all this impossible kindness crushing her chest. "I'm not worth that. I'm not worth any of it." Rowan crossed the room in 3 strides and gripped her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You are worth it. You're worth every dollar I gave Harold and more. You're worth fighting for. Don't you understand that?" "Why?" The word came out broken. "Why do you care so much? I'm nobody. Just a rejected mail-order bride who showed up on your doorstep with nothing. Why are you willing to risk everything for someone like me?" "Because you're not nobody." Rowan's voice was rough with emotion. "You're the woman who fixed my porch without being asked, who taught my daughter to sew and my son that kindness isn't weakness, who made this house feel like a home again instead of a place we're just surviving in. You're Elena, and that means something." Elena's vision blurred with tears she'd been holding back all day. It doesn't matter what I mean if Harold destroys you in the process. I can't live with that. And I can't live with you sacrificing yourself to a man who'll make you miserable out of spite. Rowan's grip on her shoulders gentled. We'll find another way. Together. But you're not facing Harold alone. Not now. Not ever. The certainty in his voice almost undid her. Elena wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that there was a solution that didn't end with someone she cared about suffering. But life had taught her that good intentions didn't prevent bad outcomes. What if there is no other way, she whispered. Then we'll make one. Rowan pulled her into an embrace that felt like shelter and promise wrapped together. I didn't pull you off that platform just to watch you walk into another trap. Trust me, Elena, please. She wanted to. Standing in the circle of his arms with her face pressed against his chest, she wanted to trust that everything would work out, that Harold's threats were empty, that love and determination could overcome legal manipulation and financial vulnerability. But wanting something didn't make it true. Still, for tonight, she let herself lean into Rowan's strength and pretend that trust was enough. They stayed like that until the fire burned low and the night pressed cold against the windows. When they finally separated, Rowan made her promise not to do anything without telling him first. Elena agreed, though the promise sat heavy in her chest like a stone. She lay awake most of the night, staring at the ceiling and trying to see a path forward that didn't end in destruction. By the time dawn grayed the windows, she'd made a decision she knew Rowan would hate. She waited until he left for a job in town, roof repairs for the banker that would take most of the day. Eli went with him, eager for the work and the wages Rowan would split with him. Rose was contentedly playing with her carved animals in the corner, creating elaborate stories that required no adult participation. Elena put on her better dress, still worn, still showing signs of hard travel, but clean and mended. She braided her hair with shaking hands and checked her reflection in the small mirror, seeing a woman who looked far braver than she felt. Rose, sweetheart, I need to go out for a bit. Rose looked up from her game. Where? Just into town. I'll be back before supper. The lie burned. Can you stay here and be good? Can I come with you? Not this time, but I'll bring you something nice from Mrs. Patterson's store. Another lie, compounding the first. Rose accepted this with the easy trust of a child who'd never been betrayed by the adults in her life. Elena kissed her forehead and headed for the door before her courage failed. The walk to Harold's ranch took 40 minutes through mud that tried to claim her boots with each step. The Double B was bigger than she'd expected. Sprawling barn, large ranch house, corrals that spoke of wealth and success. Everything Harold had wanted to show off on their wedding day, probably. Everything she was supposed to be impressed by. She felt nothing except grim determination. Harold was in the barn when she arrived, supervising 2 ranch hands who were repairing a stall. He saw her approaching and dismissed the workers with a gesture, his expression shifting to satisfaction that made Elena's skin crawl. Miss Whitmore, I didn't expect you so soon. Let's not pretend this is a social call. Elena stopped a safe distance away, keeping space between them. I came to discuss your terms. My terms are simple. Honor the contract. Marry me. Live here as my wife. Harold leaned against the stall door with studied casualness. In return, I'll drop any legal action against Mercer and leave his family alone. And if I refuse, then I proceed with the lawsuit. Mercer loses everything. His workshop, probably his cabin, once the debts pile up. His children end up in an orphanage because he can't afford to keep them. Harold's voice was matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing weather instead of destroying a family. Is that what you want? You know it's not. Then the choice is simple. Harold pushed off the stall door and moved closer. Elena forced herself not to retreat. I'm not an unreasonable man, Elena. I can provide for you. The ranch is profitable. The house is comfortable. You'd have an easier life here than playing housemaid for Mercer and his brats. The casual cruelty toward Rose and Eli sparked anger in Elena's chest. They're good children. They're not your children. You're wasting yourself on another man's family when you could be building your own here. Harold was close enough now that Elena could see the calculation in his eyes. I'll even sweeten the deal. Marry me and I'll give Mercer enough money to rebuild his ranch dream. Everyone wins. The offer was designed to be tempting. Elena could end the threat to Rowan's family and give him the future he'd sacrificed when he paid off Harold the first time. All it would cost was her freedom, her happiness, and any chance at the life she'd started to imagine in that cabin by the Pine Ridge. "I need time to think," she said. "You have until Sunday. That's 2 days." Harold smiled, confident in his victory. "Come back with your answer then. And Elena, make the right choice. For everyone's sake." Elena left without responding, her mind already racing ahead to Sunday and impossible decisions. She walked back to the cabin in a daze, barely noticing the mud or the cold or the distance. When she arrived, she found chaos. Rose was sitting on the porch steps crying while Mrs. Chen tried to comfort her. The neighbor woman looked up when Elena approached, relief flooding her face. "Thank heavens! She's been hysterical since she realized you were gone." Elena ran to Rose and dropped to her knees. "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" "I'm here. I came back." Rose threw her arms around Elena's neck with desperate strength. "You left without telling me where. I thought you went away forever like Mama did." "Oh, Rose, no. I would never leave like that." Elena held the sobbing child, guilt crushing her chest. "I'm sorry. I should have explained better. You said town, but you were gone so long, and Mrs. Chen came over and you still weren't back, and I thought—" Rose couldn't finish through her tears. Mrs. Chen met Elena's eyes over Rose's head, her expression knowing and concerned. "Where were you, Miss Whitmore?" Elena couldn't lie to Mrs. Chen's direct question with Rose shaking in her arms. "I had business to attend to, personal business." "With Harold Boone?" The question landed like a stone. Elena stiffened. "How did you—" "His ranch hand was in town this morning. Said Harold told him to expect a visitor this afternoon. A woman from Mercer's place." Mrs. Chen's voice was gentle but firm. "People talk, dear, and in a town this size, secrets don't keep long. It's not what you think. I think you're in trouble, and I think Rowan Mercer should know about it." Mrs. Chen stood, brushing mud from her skirts. "I'll leave you to settle this child. But Elena, whatever Harold Boone is offering or threatening, it's not worth sacrificing yourself. Some prices are too high to pay." She left before Elena could respond. Elena carried Rose inside and spent the next hour calming her down, singing the songs they'd learned together and promising repeatedly that she wasn't leaving, wasn't disappearing, wasn't going to abandon her. By the time Rose finally settled with her carved animals and a cup of warm milk, Elena felt like she'd aged 10 years. When Rowan and Eli returned at dusk, they found a quiet cabin. Rose was asleep on the bench, exhausted from crying. Elena was cooking supper with mechanical precision, her face carefully blank. Eli took one look at his sleeping sister and his jaw tightened. "What happened?" "She got scared when I was gone longer than expected." Elena kept her eyes on the pot she was stirring. "She's fine now." "Where were you?" Rowan's voice was too calm, too controlled. Elena should lie, should deflect, should do anything except tell the truth that would hurt him. But she was so tired of lying. "I went to Harold's ranch." The silence was crushing. Eli made a small sound of shock. Rowan went very still. "You promised," Rowan said quietly. "You promised you wouldn't do anything without telling me first." "I know. And you went anyway." "Yes." "Why?" The hurt in Rowan's voice was worse than anger would have been. Elena finally looked at him, letting him see the fear and desperation she'd been hiding. "Because he gave me until Sunday to decide. Marry him, and he drops the lawsuit and gives you money to rebuild your ranch. Refuse, and he destroys everything you've worked for. I wanted to see if there was a way to negotiate, to find an option that didn't end with you losing everything. So you walked into his trap alone." Rowan's voice was shaking now. "You went to face a man who's already proven he's manipulative and cruel, without backup, without protection, without even telling anyone where you'd gone. Do you have any idea—" He stopped, dragging a hand through his hair. "Rose thought you'd left forever. She was inconsolable. And you were making deals with the man who humiliated you." "I was trying to protect you." "I don't need your protection. I need your trust." Rowan's composure finally cracked. "I need you to believe that I can handle this, that we can handle this together. Instead, you snuck off behind my back to offer yourself like a sacrifice to a man who sees you as property." "What else am I supposed to do?" Elena's voice broke. "Stand here and watch him destroy you? Watch Eli and Rose end up in an orphanage because I couldn't pay a debt that's legally mine? That debt is Harold's lie. It's not legal, and it's not yours. You don't know that. You're guessing based on hope and righteous anger, but you don't actually know what a judge would decide if this went to court. Elena set down her spoon with shaking hands. I grew up in an orphanage, Rowan. I watched what happened to children whose parents couldn't afford to keep them. I saw the damage it did. I won't let that happen to Eli and Rose because of me. So you'll marry a man who'll make you miserable instead? If that's what it takes? Yes. Elena met his eyes, willing him to understand. Your children matter more than my happiness. They just do. Rowan stared at her like she'd struck him. And what we have here, what you've built with them, with me, that doesn't matter? It matters so much it's killing me. Elena's voice dropped to a whisper. But it matters enough that I'll walk away if that's what keeps them safe. Eli had been silent through the whole exchange, but now he moved forward with his young face set in determined lines. No. Both adults looked at him. No, Eli repeated. You're not leaving, and you're not marrying that man. Eli, you don't understand, Elena started. I understand that you think sacrificing yourself makes you noble, but it doesn't. It just makes everyone miserable. Eli's voice was steady, older than his 10 years. Mama taught me that sometimes the brave thing isn't falling on the sword, it's standing up and fighting even when you're scared. This is different. Say, how? How is this different from Mama fighting the fever? She could have given up. The doctor said she should accept it, but she fought for every day she had left because she knew we needed her. Eli's eyes were bright with unshed tears. You're doing the opposite. You're giving up without fighting because you think it's noble. But it's not. It's just quitting. The words hit Elena like physical blows. I'm trying to protect you. Then fight! Eli's voice cracked. Fight Harold Boone. Fight the stupid contract. Fight for the life you have here with us. Stop deciding you're not worth fighting for and just fight. Elena's vision blurred. She looked at this fierce, wounded child who'd lost his mother and spent 6 weeks testing her worthiness and saw him offering her something she'd never had before. Unconditional belief that she deserved good things. I don't know how, she whispered. Then we'll teach you. Rowan's voice was rough but determined. He crossed to her and took her hands, holding them firmly in his own. Elena, listen to me. Tomorrow morning, we're going to see Judge Morrison. He's fair, and he knows law better than Harold's intimidation tactics. We'll show him the contract, explain the situation, and get a real legal opinion instead of Harold's lies. And if the judge says the contract is binding, then we'll figure out the next step, together. Rowan's grip tightened. But you don't get to make unilateral decisions about sacrificing yourself anymore. We're a family here. Families make choices together. I'm not family. Yes, you are. Rose's sleepy voice came from the bench. She sat up, rubbing her eyes, her face still blotchy from earlier tears. You're family because we say you are. Right, Papa? Rowan's expression softened as he looked at his daughter. Right, Rose. And family doesn't leave, Rose continued with the absolute certainty of a 6-year-old who'd decided how the world should work. Even when things are hard, even when bad men try to take them away, family stays. Elena's resistance crumbled. She'd spent her entire life being temporary. The orphan who'd be placed eventually, the mail-order bride who'd be shipped off, the house guest who'd move on when circumstances changed. But these 3 people were looking at her like she was permanent, like she belonged, like she was family. Okay, she whispered. We'll go to the judge tomorrow. Together. Rowan pulled her into an embrace that Rose immediately joined, wrapping her small arms around both of them. Eli hung back for a moment, then stepped forward awkwardly, completing the circle. They stood like that in the middle of the kitchen while supper cooled on the stove and the last light faded from the windows. 4 people who'd been broken by loss and circumstance, holding each other together through sheer, stubborn determination. Elena had no idea if Judge Morrison would help them, had no idea if Harold's threats were real or if they could survive whatever came next. But for the first time since arriving in Cedar Bluff, she wasn't facing it alone. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. Judge Morrison's office smelled like old paper and tobacco smoke. Elena sat in a hard wooden chair between Rowan and his children, her hands clenched in her lap while the judge read through Harold's contract with maddening slowness. The morning sun slanted through dusty windows, illuminating particles that drifted like snow through the stale air. The judge was older than Elena had expected, somewhere past 60, with white hair and spectacles that he kept adjusting as he read. His face gave nothing away, which terrified her more than open hostility would have. Finally, he set down the paper and removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Well, this is creative. I'll give Boone that much." "Creative how?" Rowan's voice was tight with tension. "Creative in that it's complete nonsense dressed up in legal language." Judge Morrison tapped the contract with one finger. "The mail-order bride arrangement is a private contract between Miss Whitmore and Mr. Boone. When he publicly rejected her at the train station, he voided the agreement. End of story." Elena felt her chest expand with the first full breath she'd taken in 24 hours. "So the contract isn't binding?" "The contract was binding until Boone announced to half of Cedar Bluff that he no longer wanted to marry you. That's called repudiation, a legal term for I'm backing out of this deal. Once he did that, you had no further obligation." The judge put his glasses back on and looked at Elena directly. "The agency might have advanced him funds, but that's between Boone and the agency. It has nothing to do with you or Rowan Mercer." "But Harold said," Elena started. "Harold Boone said a lot of things, I'm sure. Most of them designed to frighten you into compliance." Judge Morrison's expression hardened. "This isn't the first time he's tried to manipulate legal proceedings to his advantage. Last year, he sued a ranch hand for breach of contract when the man quit over unpaid wages. The case was thrown out in 10 minutes. Rowan leaned forward. "So if he tries to sue—" "He won't, because he knows he'd lose, and losing in court means paying the other side's legal fees. Boone's many things, but he's not stupid with money." The judge folded the contract and handed it back to Elena. "My advice? Tear this up. Burn it. Use it to line a chicken coop. It has no legal weight whatsoever." Elena took the paper with shaking hands, unable to believe it could be this simple. 6 weeks of fear and uncertainty dissolved in a 10-minute meeting. "What if he tries something else?" Eli asked quietly. He'd been silent through the whole meeting, but his young face was creased with worry. Judge Morrison looked at the boy with unexpected kindness. "Then you come back here and we deal with it. But son, men like Harold Boone are bullies. They rely on intimidation because they know they can't win fair fights. Now that you've called his bluff, he'll likely move on to easier targets." They left the judge's office with the spring sun bright overhead and mud drying in the streets. Elena felt lighter than she had in weeks, but the relief was tangled with lingering anxiety. Men like Harold didn't give up just because a judge said they should. "We should celebrate," Rose announced as they climbed into the wagon. "With cake or pie. Papa, can we get pie? Papa, can we get—" "We'll see," Rowan said, but he was smiling. The first genuine smile Elena had seen from him since she'd admitted going to Harold's ranch. They were halfway home when they saw the smoke. Black columns rising above the pine trees, too thick and dark to be cookfire smoke. Rowan's expression changed instantly, all the lightness draining away. He snapped the reins, urging the horses faster, and Elena's stomach dropped as the smoke grew thicker. Please not the cabin, please not— But it wasn't the cabin, it was Rowan's workshop. Flames consumed the small building, orange and violent against the spring sky. Rowan was out of the wagon before it fully stopped, running toward the blaze. Elena grabbed both children, holding them back even as Eli struggled to follow his father. "Stay here," she commanded. "Both of you, stay in the wagon." She ran after Rowan, her skirts tangling around her legs. He was trying to get inside, probably to save tools or lumber, but the heat drove him back. The workshop was already lost. The flames had too much hold, the old wood burning too fast. "Rowan, stop!" Elena caught his arm. "It's gone. There's nothing you can do." "My tools, the commission pieces, everything I've been working on," his voice cracked with desperation, "is not worth dying for." Elena pulled harder, using all her strength to drag him away from the heat. "Please. The children need you alive more than they need tools." Rowan stopped fighting, but his face was devastated as he watched years of work disappear into flame and smoke. Elena held onto his arm, feeling him shake with the effort of not falling apart. Neighbors started arriving, Mrs. Chen with her husband, Tom from the mercantile. Others Elena didn't know. They formed a bucket line from the well, throwing water on the surrounding trees and grass to keep the fire from spreading, but nobody tried to save the workshop. It was too far gone. By the time the flames died to smoldering ruins, the sun was setting. Rowan stood silent among the ashes, his face blank with shock. The children pressed against Elena's sides, Rose crying quietly while Eli stared at the destruction with hard eyes. "This was Harold," Eli said flatly. Elena wanted to disagree, but the timing was too convenient. They'd gone to the judge that morning. By afternoon, Rowan's livelihood was burning. Tom Chen approached, his face grim. "My boys saw a rider leaving your property around noon, said he was moving fast, like he didn't want to be seen." "Did they recognize him?" Rowan's voice was hollow. "They recognized the horse. It's Harold Boone's bay gelding, distinctive white blaze on the forehead." The confirmation settled over them like a shroud. This wasn't an accident. This was retaliation. Mrs. Chen touched Elena's shoulder gently. "Come to our house. All of you. You shouldn't be alone tonight." But Rowan shook his head. "Thank you, but no. We'll manage." "Rowan," Tom started. "I said we'll manage." Rowan's voice was hard now, anger finally breaking through the shock. "Thank you for your help with the fire. We'll be fine from here." The neighbors left reluctantly, casting worried glances back as they departed. Elena herded the children into the cabin while Rowan stood outside, staring at the smoking ruins of everything he'd built. She got Rose and Eli settled with warm milk and bread, though neither ate much. Rose kept crying in hiccuping bursts. Eli sat rigid and silent, his jaw clenched so tight Elena worried about his teeth. "It's not fair," Rose whispered. "Papa didn't do anything wrong." "No, he didn't." Elena pulled the child close. "Sometimes bad things happen to good people. It's not fair and it's not right. But it happens anyway." "What's Papa going to do now? How will he work without his workshop?" Elena didn't have an answer. She sent both children to bed early, then went outside to where Rowan still stood in the gathering darkness. "You should come inside," she said quietly. "I built that workshop myself. Every board, every nail. It took me 3 months." Rowan's voice was distant. 10 years of tools. The cabinet commission that was supposed to pay for winter supplies. The table I was making for Rose's birthday. All of it. Gone. "I know." "No, you don't." Rowan turned to face her, and Elena saw something broken behind his eyes. "That workshop was how I supported my family after Sarah died. It was how I proved I could keep them safe and fed and housed. It was—" He stopped, dragging a hand across his face. "It was all I had to offer." "That's not true. You have this cabin, the children, a reputation as a skilled carpenter. A reputation doesn't feed my family, and without tools or a place to work, I can't take commissions, which means no income. Which means—" Rowan looked at the cabin, and Elena saw the calculation happening behind his eyes. The same arithmetic she'd watched him do every time he bought supplies. Only now the numbers didn't work at all. "We'll figure something out," she said, even though she had no idea what. "Will we?" Rowan's laugh was bitter. "Harold Boone just destroyed my livelihood because I had the audacity to help you, and there's nothing I can do about it. Can't prove it was him. Can't rebuild without money I don't have. Can't even—" He stopped, his shoulders sagging. "I should have let him have you. Should have stayed out of it. Then none of this would have happened." The words hit Elena like a slap. "You don't mean that." "Don't I? Look what a helping you cost me. My savings, my workshop, my ability to provide for my children. What's next? The cabin? Should I wait for that to burn too?" Elena felt something cold settle in her chest. "If you want me to leave, just say so." Rowan was silent for a long moment, then quietly, "Maybe you should. Before Harold decides to take something else from me." The words were meant to hurt, and they succeeded. Elena nodded once, not trusting her voice, and walked back into the cabin. She went straight to her room, closing the door before the tears could start. She'd known this was coming, had prepared herself for it. Temporary arrangements always ended, usually badly. She should pack her bag, leave in the morning, save everyone the prolonged agony of watching this fall apart. But the thought of walking away from Rose and Eli, from Rowan, even angry and hurting as he was, felt like tearing out something essential. She was still sitting on her bed, staring at her battered suitcase, when she heard raised voices from the main room. You can't make her leave. Eli's voice sharp with anger. That's not your decision to make. Rowan, tired and defeated. It's a stupid decision. Eli. No. You always tell me that sometimes the right thing is hard, that we do what's right even when it hurts. Well, sending Miss Elena away because you're scared is not right. It's cowardly. Elena moved to her door, opening it a crack to see Eli standing in front of his father, small and fierce and utterly certain. Watch your tone, Rowan warned. Why? So I can be polite while you ruin everything? Eli's voice cracked. She makes us happy, Papa. Rose laughs again. I don't wake up every morning feeling like the world is broken. The house feels like home instead of a place where Mama used to live. And you're going to throw that away because Harold Boone is a monster? The workshop, but can be rebuilt. We'll figure it out. But if you send her away because you're too scared to fight for her, she won't come back. And you'll spend the rest of your life regretting it. Eli's eyes were bright with tears he refused to shed. Mama wouldn't want this. She'd tell you to fight, to protect the people you love, not push them away to protect yourself. Rowan stared at his son like he'd been struck. Eli, I'm going to bed. But you should know that if Miss Elena leaves, I'm never forgiving you. Eli turned and walked to his room, closing the door with controlled precision that was somehow worse than slamming it. The silence that followed was crushing. Elena stepped out of her room slowly. Rowan stood in the middle of the main room, looking lost and broken and more alone than she'd ever seen him. He's right, Elena said quietly. Rowan's head snapped up. You were listening. It's a small cabin, sound carries. Elena moved closer, choosing her words carefully. Eli's right about a lot of things, but he's wrong about one important part. What part? You're not pushing me away to protect yourself. You're doing it to protect me and the children, because you think if I leave, Harold will stop hurting people you care about. Elena stopped a few feet away from him. But Rowan, he's already proven that's not how this works. He didn't burn your workshop because I was here. He burned it because you stood up to him, because you chose to help me over accepting his authority. The damage is already done. So you're saying it doesn't matter if you stay or go? I'm saying that Harold Boone's cruelty isn't my fault or yours. It's his. And running away doesn't stop bullies. It just teaches them that intimidation works. Rowan was silent for a long moment, staring at the floor. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw. I don't know how to fix this. The workshop, the money, Harold, I don't know how to make any of it right. Then don't fix it alone. Elena closed the distance between them. Stop trying to carry everything by yourself. Let me help. Let the children help. Let the whole town help if they're willing, but stop pushing people away because you're afraid of being hurt. I already lost Sarah. I can't, his voice broke. I can't lose someone else I care about. You care about me. Elena's voice was soft, testing the words. You know I do. Rowan looked at her finally, and Elena saw everything in his eyes, fear and hope, and something deeper that made her breath catch. I've cared about you since the day I watched you refuse to break on that platform. Every day since has only made it worse. Worse? Worse because caring about you means being terrified that something will take you away. Harold, or poverty, or just bad luck. The universe seems to take everything I care about eventually. Elena reached out and took his hands, holding them firmly. I'm not Sarah. I'm not going to die of fever. And I'm not going anywhere unless you actually want me gone. Do you? No. The word came out fierce and immediate. I want you here. I want you safe. I want... He stopped, seeming to struggle with something. I want things I have no right to want. Like what? Instead of answering with words, Rowan pulled her close and kissed her. It was clumsy and desperate and tasted like smoke and tears, but it was also honest in a way that made Elena's heart stutter. When they broke apart, Rowan pressed his forehead against hers. Like that. I want that. And I want you to stay. Not as temporary help or a house guest, but as what? Elena's voice was barely a whisper. As my wife. If you'll have me. Rowan pulled back enough to meet her eyes. I know the timing is terrible. I know I have nothing to offer except a burned workshop and 2 traumatized children and more problems than any sane person would want. But I love you, Elena, and if you'll stay, we'll figure out the rest together." Elena's throat was too tight for words. She'd spent her entire life being unwanted, the orphan nobody claimed, the bride nobody kept, the extra person taking up space. And now this man was looking at her like she was essential instead of expendable. "Yes," she managed finally. "Yes, I'll stay. I'll marry you, Her voice broke. "I love you too, even though it's probably stupid and definitely terrifying." Rowan kissed her again, softer this time, like a promise. When they separated, Elena realized Rose was standing in the doorway of her room, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Are you getting married?" she asked with a child's blunt directness. "Yes," Rowan said, not taking his eyes off Elena. "If that's all right with you?" Rose's face split into the widest smile Elena had ever seen. "Does that mean Miss Elena will be my mama?" The question hung in the air, loaded with hope and fear, and the ghost of a woman who'd died too young. Elena looked at Rowan, silently asking permission. He nodded, his eyes shining. Elena knelt down to Rose's level. "I could never replace your mama. She was special and important, and you should never forget her. But if you want, I could be your mama too. A different kind. Is that something you'd like?" Rose threw herself into Elena's arms with enough force to nearly knock her over. Yes, I want that." Eli's door opened. He stood in the threshold, his expression carefully neutral. "Is this actually happening, or are you going to change your mind again when things get hard?" "It's actually happening," Rowan said firmly. "I was scared and stupid earlier. I'm sorry." Eli studied his father for a long moment, then looked at Elena. "You're really staying, even with everything that's happened." "I'm really staying." "And you're going to marry Papa and be our mother?" "If you're all right with that." Eli's carefully constructed composure cracked slightly. "I think Mama would like you. She always said the best people were the ones who kept fighting even when things were hard. And you keep fighting, so yeah, I'm all right with it." It wasn't a ringing endorsement, but coming from Eli, it was practically a declaration of love. Elena held out an arm, and after a moment's hesitation, Eli joined the embrace. They stayed like that, 4 people holding each other in the middle of a cabin, while outside the ruins of the workshop still smoldered in the darkness. The next morning, Elena woke to find Rowan already gone. She found him in the ruins of the workshop, salvaging what little had survived the fire. Some tools had been in the cabin for a repair job. A few pieces of lumber stored in the shed had escaped the flames. Not much, but something. "What are you doing?" Elena asked. "Starting over." Rowan held up a hammer, its handle charred but functional. "I can't rebuild the whole workshop yet, but I can make a workspace under the shed roof, take small jobs, build back slowly." "That will take months." "Then it takes months." Rowan set down the hammer and looked at her directly. "You told me last night to stop trying to carry everything alone. So I'm not. I'm asking for help. Tom Chen offered to loan me some tools. Mrs. Patterson said she'd spread word that I'm taking small commissions. Even the banker, who usually wouldn't give me the time of day, said he'd extend a small line of credit because I have a reputation for good work." Elena felt her throat tighten. The town is helping. The town saw what Harold did and decided they didn't like it. Turns out people have limits for what they'll tolerate, even from men with money. Rowan pulled Elena close. "And they like you. Mrs. Chen told half the town how you've been helping with Rose and Eli. The ladies' auxiliary apparently thinks you're good for me. Even Martha Reeves from the boarding house said you deserved better than what you got." "Martha Reeves said that? Don't sound so shocked. Even judgmental busybodies have moments of decency." Rowan kissed her forehead. "We're going to be all right, Elena. It won't be easy and it won't be quick, but we're going to rebuild." He was right, though the path forward was harder than either of them anticipated. The next weeks were a blur of work and worry. Rowan took whatever jobs people offered, repairs too small for proper profit, furniture pieces that barely covered materials. Elena sewed for the women in town, accepting payment in food and fabric and small amounts of cash that she hoarded carefully. The children helped where they could. Eli worked alongside his father with grim determination, learning carpentry faster than Rowan had thought possible. Rose ran errands and delivered finished sewing projects, her cheerful chatter charming customers into ordering more. They survived on stubbornness and community goodwill and the fierce determination of people who'd been knocked down but refused to stay there. Harold Boone watched from a distance, waiting for them to crumble. But when weeks passed and the Mercer family remained standing, bruised but unbroken, his interest seemed to wane, or perhaps he'd moved on to easier targets, as Judge Morrison had predicted. Either way, he didn't return. 2 months after the fire, on a Sunday morning in late spring, Elena and Rowan were married in Cedar Bluff's small church. The ceremony was simple. Elena wore a dress she'd sewn herself from the fabric Mrs. Patterson had gifted her weeks ago, altered to fit properly. Rose and Eli stood beside them, Rose clutching a bouquet of wildflowers, and Eli holding the ring with careful solemnity. Judge Morrison performed the ceremony. The church was packed, not because Elena and Rowan had dozens of close friends, but because the town had decided this wedding mattered. It was a statement, a refusal to let Harold Boone's cruelty win. When the judge pronounced them married, Rowan kissed Elena with a gentleness that made her eyes sting. Rose cheered. Eli actually smiled, and the congregation applauded like they'd witnessed something important instead of just another frontier wedding. The reception was held at the Chen's house, with food contributed by half the town. Someone brought a fiddle, and there was dancing in the yard despite the mud. Elena found herself passed from partner to partner, Tom Chen, the banker, even Mrs. Patterson, who clasped Elena's hands and said, "I'm glad you stayed, dear. This town needs more women with spine." As evening fell and the party began to wind down, Elena found Rowan standing at the edge of the gathering, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. "What are you thinking?" she asked, slipping her hand into his. "That I'm glad I crossed that street. That day at the train station." Rowan's voice was quiet. "I almost didn't. Almost decided it wasn't my business what happened to a stranger." "What changed your mind?" "You did. The way you held yourself together even when everything was falling apart. You reminded me that sometimes the right thing is hard, but you do it anyway because the alternative is becoming someone you don't recognize." He turned to face her, and Elena saw everything in his eyes. Love and gratitude and the bone-deep relief of someone who'd found what he didn't know he was missing. "You saved me, Elena, not the other way around." "We saved each other," Elena corrected. "That's how this works." Rose and Eli ran up then, demanding that their parents come dance, and the moment of quiet reflection ended. But as Elena let herself be pulled back into the celebration, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. She'd arrived in Cedar Bluff expecting to be a bride and ended up rejected on a platform in front of strangers. She'd accepted charity from a widower and become a mother to his children. She'd faced down a cruel man's threats and watched everything burn, only to find that some things, the important things, couldn't be destroyed by fire or fear. 3 months ago, she'd been nobody, an orphan with no prospects and no future beyond survival. Now she was Elena Mercer, wife to a carpenter, mother to 2 children who'd needed her as much as she'd needed them, part of a community that had chosen to protect her instead of judge her. The transformation hadn't been smooth or easy. There had been tears and fear, and moments when everything seemed lost. But standing in the Chen's yard with her new family around her and the future stretching open instead of closed, Elena understood something fundamental. Sometimes the life you're supposed to have isn't the one you planned. Sometimes it's the one you build from the ruins of your expectations, piece by painful piece, until you look around and realize you've created something better than you ever imagined. Harold Boone had tried to break her on that platform, had tried to use contracts and threats and fire to force her into submission, but he'd failed to understand the essential truth about people who'd survived real hardship. They didn't break easily, and when they built something new, they built it to last. 2 years later, Elena stood in the doorway of the newly rebuilt workshop, larger than the original, with better tools and more space, watching Rowan teach Eli how to join wood properly. Rose was inside the cabin, practicing her sewing on a new dress that didn't need holes mended because Elena had made it to fit her growing frame. The ranch dream Rowan had once imagined had transformed into something different but equally valuable. The workshop had become successful enough to employ 2 apprentices from town. Elena's sewing had grown into a small business, with women coming from neighboring settlements for her careful work. They would never be wealthy. The workshop fire had cost them too much in time and money to recover completely, but they were comfortable, More importantly, they were happy. Elena placed a hand on her stomach, feeling the first flutters of movement from the child growing there. A little sister or brother for Rose and Eli, a future taking shape inside her like a promise. "Mama," Rose called from inside, "can you help me with this seam?" The word still made Elena's chest tighten with emotion, even after 2 years of hearing it daily. Mama. Not Miss Elena, not the temporary house guest, but Mama, permanent, essential, hers. "Coming, sweetheart," she called back. As she turned from the workshop, Elena caught a glimpse of Cedar Bluff in the distance, the town that had watched her humiliation and then, unexpectedly, chosen to offer her shelter. It wasn't perfect. Martha Reeves still watched her with too much interest, and there were still whispers about the rejected mail-order bride who'd somehow become a respected member of the community. But the whispers didn't hurt anymore. Let them talk. Let them speculate about how a woman with nothing had built a life worth living. Let them wonder how she'd transformed rejection into belonging. Elena knew the truth. It hadn't been magic or luck or even love, though love had helped. It had been choice, hers and Rowan's and the children's, the choice to fight for each other, to build instead of accepting what others decided they deserved, to believe that family wasn't something you were born into, but something you created through stubborn determination and daily choosing. The rejected bride hadn't been rescued by a kind stranger. She'd rescued herself, one decision at a time, until she'd built a life that belonged to her completely. And that, Elena thought, as she went inside to help her daughter with her sewing, was a better ending than any fairy tale could offer, because fairy tales were about being saved. Real life was about learning you were strong enough to save yourself and generous enough to help save others along the way.